Chapter 1154. No rules, no rules. This was the main theme of chaos. But no rules was also a kind of order. Maybe everyone couldn't understand it, but they couldn't deny its existence. The gloomy and twisted forest was torn apart in the monstrous energy. Endless black mist gathered around Jiang Shangyu. The black mist surrounded the village, layer upon layer. It was not a short time. But Wu Qing never moved. The amazing killing intent continued to gather in him and climbed to the peak in the shortest time. But he didn't move. It was not that he didn't want to. It was that he couldn't. He couldn't. In less than half a minute, he wanted to burst out the energy in his body countless times, destroy the village, and kill all the creatures. That was what he thought, and that was what he did. But in reality, he didn't move at all. This was the order of chaos. He couldn't adapt. His inner thoughts and actual actions were in conflict without any rhyme or reason. The order of chaos was spreading unscrupulously and finally reached a certain limit. If one couldn't get rid of this order for a long time, he would be assimilated by chaos. That was the end that no one could escape. In the deepest chaos, even Huang Shi, the strongest in the history of the human clan, would be transformed into a shadow creature if she fell into chaos. The misty energy completely wrapped Wu Qing's body. The amazing killing intent was slowly falling back. But in the order of chaos, Wu Qing's will became more and more condensed. The black mist gathered on Jiang Shangyu and began to spread from him. Finally, it surrounded the entire village. The black mist seemed to be real and began to build a shape in the air. In less than half a minute, the village in front of Wu Qing had completely disappeared. What appeared in front of him was a war fortress that was completely made of black mist. The fortress was not illusory. It seemed to be real under the accumulation of countless black mist. Jiang Shangyu's figure appeared at the top of the fortress, and he snapped his fingers with a smile on his face. Boom! The loud noise was earth-shattering. The appearance of the fortress standing between heaven and earth suddenly changed. Muzzles appeared one after another on the thick walls. All kinds of weapons extended from every corner of the fortress, aiming at Wu Qing's body. Fire! The raging artillery fire smashed down in an instant, drowning everything. Black energy that was constantly exploding and destroying was everywhere. The incredible destructive power seemed to ignite the entire space in an instant. Heartless figure finally moved. He wanted to fight back. But when he did that, he suddenly took a step back. There was no defense at all. Countless black energies exploded around his body, drowning everything. Jiang Shangyu smiled calmly and appreciated everything in front of him. His smiling eyes carried an indescribable sense of anticipation. He had a considerable understanding of the current Heartless. Heartless state was much more complete than he had imagined. However, his injuries and the restrictions he received in the real world remained the same. He sensed the aura of catastrophe from Wu Qing. But even the catastrophe wasn't complete at the moment, and in the real world, the effects of the catastrophe were limited. Jiang Shangyu had become a chaotic creature. His greatest source of combat power was the chaotic laws. In terms of space, this place could no longer be regarded as Zhongzhou state, but it was still absolutely affected by the real environment. In the chaotic rules, Jiang Shangyu was completely at home. His strength could vaguely break through the restrictions of the real environment, and he could also use the real environment and the chaotic order to the greatest extent to suppress Heartless. Heartless was no match for him. Because he knew Heartless state better. And the entire space-time corridor didn't know his state at this time. The dark energy twisted and exploded wildly. At the very center of the explosion, a hot and dazzling light finally burst out. After countless attempts and explorations, Heartless finally made a sword move. Under the chaotic rules, his idea was self-destruction, and the action that came with this idea was a full outbreak. His body instantly tightened. The surging energy surged with him as the center. His energy had been restored to the peak state. The outbreak at this moment was completely equivalent to 13 murderous weapons firing at the same time. The constantly erupting energy gathered into a thick and dazzling beam of light. The moment the beam of light lit up, the energy that had been suppressed to the extreme had fiercely hit the black fortress. Plug it! The black fortress shook violently. The black mist fluctuated, and a large number of weapons were directly deformed and twisted under the impact of the beam of light. Jiang Shangyu took a step forward. The entire stronghold was one with him. As he advanced, the stronghold changed again. In the blink of an eye, the originally huge black stronghold expanded to a towering scale. It was already comparable to a small or medium-sized city. Jiang Shangyu gently raised the corner of his mouth, but there was no emotion in his eyes. He took a deep look at Heartless and twisted his neck. The next second, a black trench coat that was exactly the same as Heartless appeared on his body. A kind of energy that Heartless was extremely familiar with but extremely disgusting bloomed in Jiang Shangyu's hands. It was a colorful and incomparably gorgeous energy. The moment the colorful luster appeared, it turned black in Jiang Shangyu's hands. Jiang Shangyu laughed. He took a step forward again. The distance of hundreds of meters seemed to not exist at all. The moment his feet fell, Jiang Shangyu had directly appeared in front of Heartless. The mighty black energy instantly turned into a boundless ocean. Jiang Shangyu put his fingers together like a sword. He stabbed straight. The extremely sharp sword energy completely burst out from his fingertips, tearing everything apart. Heartless' body suddenly moved a distance of hundreds of meters. The sharp sword light almost brushed his body and shot out from his side. Jiang Shangyu casually withdrew his palm and said with a smile, "How about it? I'm using your energy. Are you familiar with it?" The majestic and incredible energy emanated from Jiang Shangyu's body. No, to be exact, it should be pouring out. Aimlessly and without reservation. The surging black energy became a raging tide. He didn't even attack, but just vented the energy in his body to his heart's content. As he continued to consume energy, Heartless' aura obviously began to weaken. "You are destined to be my divine weapon," Jiang Shangyu said calmly. He didn't want to destroy Heartless. At this moment, he completely connected himself with Heartless' energy. Now, what he squandered every minute and second was all energy belonging to Heartless. When this energy was squandered, Heartless would just be a sword. In the chaotic order, it would become Jiang Shangyu's Sword of Chaos. Chapter 1155. Complete synchronization of survival, complete sharing of energy. At this moment, Jiang Shangyu became ruthless. The man and the sword appeared to be two individuals, but in reality, they were already one person. They were all humans, or rather, they were all swords. With Wu Qing's current state, unless he used the most extreme method, there was no possibility of getting out of this state. The fortress, the city, and the sky was filled with black fog. Everything around him was Jiang Shangyu's own domain. In terms of space, he had left Zhongzhou state in a sense. In his own domain, he could get rid of the influence of the real environment. This so-called getting rid of might be very, very small. It didn't even increase the upper limit of one's combat power by much. But in his chaos domain, he already had the ability to break free from the influence of the real environment. In other words, in this domain, he gained an ability that shouldn't exist in the real world for a short period of time. There were many versions of this ability under the starry sky. A full-scale invasion. Deep-level invasion. No matter how it was called, invasion was the essence. The moment he approached Ruthless, Jiang Shangyu directly invaded Ruthless' fate node. Heartless was essentially a rock. But he had his own will and thoughts, so he was still alive. Life naturally had its own destiny. The moment his fate was invaded, all the energy in Wu Qing's body was shared with Jiang Shangyu. And Jiang Shangyu didn't even need to fight. The only thing he needed to do was to squander. Unscrupulous squandering. Colorful energy kept flashing on Jiang Shangyu's body. The moment the light flashed, it directly turned dark. Jiang Shangyu's body slightly tightened, and he slowly rose into the air. Withstanding the merciless and boundless unimaginable energy, a large amount of black light surged out from his body. Black energy poured into the sky, tore the ground, and strengthened the black city in Jiang Shangyu's domain. Under the impact of the huge energy, Jiang Shangyu's face was a little pale, but his eyes were full of excitement, even a little fanaticism. "Is this your power?" Wu Qing's shadow was reflected in his eyes, and his smile was full of mockery. King Wei truly lives up to his reputation. If you are truly complete, there is no doubt that you will be able to reach the imperial capital directly, reaching the upper limit of combat power in the real world. But it doesn't matter. I like imperfections and I like imperfections. When your energy is exhausted, I will return it to you. With you here, even Li Tianlan is no match for me. He spoke from the bottom of his heart. Only in this secret base could Jiang Shangyu's strength be maximized. Only in this way could he turn his domain into a city or even a world of his own. Only in this way could he invade the ruthless Fate Node. If he left here, the limit of the combat capability he could exert was beyond the peak of the invincible realm, but it was not close to the supreme level. This kind of strength was no match for Li Tianlan now. But with Wu Qing, it was completely different. This was his domain. He could return the energy he squandered in his domain to Wu Qing. But only if the merciless energy is used up here. He sank into the Order of the Shadow and became his divine weapon. At that time, coupled with Heartless, whose energy was at its peak, even if he left this place, he would still be invincible. What did Li Tianlan have to fear? Majestic black light whistled and danced in the battlefield. Wu Qing's body shook violently, as if he was struggling. Jiang Shangyu smiled and snapped his fingers. Right now, he was bearing the weight of a heartless fate. The two of them could be said to be one. Thus, as the black light scattered, Wu Qing's entire body suddenly erupted with a dazzling, colorful energy. A large amount of energy spread in all directions without any purpose. To be exact, it was a purposeless waste. Wu Qing's aura continued to weaken at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not only was Jiang Shangyu squandering his energy, but he was also forcing Wu Qing to squander his energy. The light lingered between the two of them. The contrast between the brilliance and the darkness was shocking. In the messy light and shadow, Wu Qing's stiff body moved little by little, and he slowly raised his head. Jiang Shangyu's figure clearly appeared in his perception. He observed silently, as if taking a deep look at him. Although he had no facial features and no eyes. 10 minutes. This was the conclusion he came to. It was an extremely accurate conclusion, and the error would not exceed 3 seconds. If he and Jiang Shangyu squandered their energy at the same time, in 10 minutes at most, his combat capability would plummet. Then he would drop to a whole new level. Within 20 minutes, all of his energy would be used up. This place isolated Li Tianlan's perception. At that time, his only end was to sink in the shadow. I remember that you seem to have another choice. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and looked straight at Wu Qing. But I don't quite remember, but you can try? His reminder was full of malice and mockery. Wu Qing was still quietly perceiving Jiang Shangyu's state. He knew that he had another choice. Countless humiliating memories suddenly began to surge in the center of his mind. Instead of sinking in the shadow, it was better to face the past. Wu Qing reached forward. In an instant, the colorful energy on his body completely solidified. The black windbreaker fluttered violently. In the upright hood of the windbreaker, there were 2 golden lights as bright as fire suddenly appeared on the head of the windbreaker, which was originally empty. It was sharp and shining. It was the light that could penetrate everything. Jiang Shangyu's figure was directly shrouded in the golden light, and the energy around him instantly solidified. Wu Qing was changing. He kept changing. The windbreaker, which was fluttering wildly, slowly disappeared. Wu Qing showed his real body. The raging energy kept whistling around him, slowly but firmly getting rid of the shackles of the chaotic order. Jiang Shangyu's invasion was purified. In the strong light, Wu Qing's figure completely changed into another appearance. He wore the golden pheasant's plume on his head, the golden armor on his body, and the cloud silk shoes on his feet. His eyes were shining, and his cloak was fluttering. The light was still refracting forward. For the first time, a weapon appeared in Wu Qing's outstretched hand. But it was not a sword. It was a golden stick that was close to his height. The soaring fighting intent and killing intent were surging. That was the immortal presumptuousness and arrogance. Flawless. Wu Qing, whose appearance had changed dramatically, stared at Jiang Shangyu, and the golden light in his eyes kept shining. This was the last appearance he wanted to remember. But it was the best way to get out of the current situation. This was his state of order. It was also the state in which he had been assimilated by order. This was absolute coldness and law. Chapter 1156. Order was the most basic structure of the world, and also the most essential structure. It could not be changed or destroyed. Unlike the swaying and struggling neutrality, the absolute state of order could only accommodate true order. It did not accept chaos, nor did it accept neutrality. The golden light shone in ruthless eyes. In an instant, the weakness of Jiang Shangyu's domain had been completely revealed in his sight. At the same time, at the moment when the golden light shone, all the colorful sword energy completely disappeared from Ruthless' body. All the sword energy dissipated from his body. Absolute order could not tolerate anything outside the order. Naturally, it could not tolerate the divine form of the neutral camp. Amidst the clear shattering sound, the half-catastrophe turned into a colorful flowing light, clearly condensing into a colorful pair of wings behind Wu Qing's back. The bright red cloak swayed slightly in the chaotic domain. The moment the colorful wings were formed, they left Ruthless' body directly. Ignoring the order, ignoring the chaos, even ignoring distance and space, the wings flapped and disappeared instantly with a flash of flowing light. Without the colorful energy, Ruthless' figure looked clearer and more real. His face was completely shrouded in the golden light, but countless golden hairs grew all over his body. Jiang Shangyu's invasion was completely cleaned up by the order. Ruthless kept taking deep breaths, and the energy that had not dissipated in time in the surrounding space merged into his body bit by bit again. Jiang Shangyu looked at all this calmly. He seemed to think of something and whispered softly, "King Wei's equal to heaven." In the neutral camp, he was King Wei. In the order camp, his original title was equal to heaven. Shoulder to shoulder with heaven and earth. This was the peerless madman who had turned the entire order camp upside down with his own strength. To some extent, this was almost equal to Ruthless' strongest state at this time. Shame, anger, depression. Vague scenes of the past began to flash in Ruthless' mind. The shining golden light in his eyes began to become chaotic. Ruthless' whole person became more and more fierce in the state of absolute anger. "You," the hoarse and fierce voice sounded between heaven and earth without any warning. It seemed that because he hadn't spoken for a long time, the voice seemed a little rigid, but the killing intent between the lines filled the entire domain. "Damn you!" Buzz. The space in the domain suddenly vibrated. Ruthless' whole body bloomed with golden light. The golden rod smashed into the ground. A large amount of black mist quickly dissipated. Wu Qing raised the staff in his hand, his aura soaring to the sky. That was the unbridled and unruliness that had long been imprinted in the legends of time, a legend that existed between reality and illusion. Order was everywhere. In the order state, Ruthless instantly broke through the combat power limits of the real environment. The golden rod expanded crazily. 3 meters, 5 meters, 10 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters, a few hundred meters. The golden cudgel was spreading wildly, growing longer and thicker. What the F***ck am I writing? A giant golden pillar suddenly appeared in the dark domain. His merciless figure continued to grow along with the enlarging golden staff, standing tall between heaven and earth. The domain was filled with an absolutely brutal killing intent. Wu Qing raised both of his hands up high, grasping the staff that was already as big as a mountain, and smashed it down with a furious roar. There was no goal, no direction. In just a few seconds, the golden rod had filled every inch of space in the black domain. The air exploded completely in the brandishing of the rod, bursting into pieces of explosions. The space was burning in the huge force and extreme speed, and the dark domain instantly became fiery red. Jiang Shangyu's figure stood there, as small as an ant. The city-sized black fortress was still standing, but under the mountain-like rod, it was as ridiculous as a matchbox. The rod smashed down completely. It was earth-shattering. Heaven and earth and the domain trembled at the same time under the huge force, and the loud roar turned into an unparalleled huge sound wave sweeping in all directions. It was as if the black fortress of the city was constantly collapsing and disintegrating. A large number of weapons were completely obliterated, and the darkness was turbulent. The merciless figure that tore the whole city apart with one blow quickly shrank, and his golden eyes were always fixed on Jiang Shangyu's figure. Charge! The golden afterimage flashed in an instant, and the next second, the golden rod, which had become the size of a normal weapon, appeared directly above Jiang Shangyu's head. Bang! In the dull sound, the almost indestructible rod smashed hard on Jiang Shangyu's forehead. There was no splattering of brains and blood as usual. Jiang Shangyu blinked his eyes directly. A low hillside 100 meters behind him collapsed directly, raising smoke and dust all over the sky. Chaos. It was chaos again. Jiang Shangyu used the chaos to effect the order here. After all, this was his domain. So the merciless blow was also affected. The rod that hit his head was directly twisted, and all the power was distorted to the back. Merciless snorted coldly. The shadow of the rod all over the sky smashed down with his voice. In an instant, the shadow of the golden rod was everywhere in the sky and on the ground. This was an all-round suppression. Jiang Shangyu did not move. It also distorted the order around him. Then he smiled softly. Cracks that could be seen with the naked eye appeared in the distorted space under the countless attacks. Jiang Shangyu could no longer see Merciless' figure. Or rather, Merciless was everywhere. His shadow was everywhere in the sky and on the ground. The violent attacks with great power smashed down from all kinds of unimaginable places, and every landing point was the weak point of this distorted space. Even though Merciless' state was now weakened and his body was incomplete, this distorted space could only protect him for less than 10 seconds at most. I like you more and more. Jiang Shangyu looked at Merciless, who was everywhere in the sky and on the ground, and said with a smile. As the earliest divine weapon who followed Huang Shi, Merciless had received Huang Shi's teaching for the longest time. In terms of the art of fighting alone, even great Emperor Shenyuan was not necessarily his match at the same level. If it weren't for this, during the years when he was assimilated by Order, the Order camp would not have called him the Great Fighting Sage, or the Fighting Celestial Lord. In several terminations and reincarnations, since Merciless left the Order camp, the position of the Fighting Celestial Lord had been empty, which undoubtedly made sense. The Fighting Celestial Lord was a title. But this was the title of the Order camp. Different from the neutral camp. The strong men of the neutral camp could split the land and be crowned king. They really stood at the peak, like the god of war and the human emperor, and could even form a space of their own. In the time corridor, there were also dukes, generals, and all kinds of titles. These titles followed a certain order, but not absolute order. In the absolute order, each title represented a unique rule. This was the nature of the world. After King Wei successfully left the Order camp, the position of the Fighting Celestial Lord had been empty. There was no doubt that this meant that no one in the Order camp could catch up with King Wei in the art of fighting. It also meant that in the Order camp, the title of the Fighting Celestial Lord still belonged to King Wei. This could not be changed, even the Order itself could not change this. And this was what Jiang Shangyu wanted to take advantage of. Are you forgetting something? Jiang Shangyu chuckled. Your title, the Fighting Celestial Lord. A ray of extremely dazzling golden light directly flew out from Jiang Shangyu. The golden light was almost the same as the golden light on Merciless. The distorted space around that was about to break began to stabilize the moment the golden light appeared. Jiang Shangyu raised his hands. A large amount of golden light kept shining and gathering in his hands, becoming clear and solid. The golden light shining on Jiang Shangyu suddenly flickered. In the golden light, Merciless' pupils suddenly contracted. He suddenly tightened his body and stared at Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu still lowered his head. In his hands, in the dense golden light, a thick golden book gradually appeared. Jiang Shangyu lowered his head and silently turned to the first page of the book. Countless names flowed across the golden page, and then instantly turned into a blank. Jiang Shangyu smiled and looked at Merciless. Do you know what this is? Merciless stood in the void, holding the stick in his hand tightly, and was silent for a long time. Jiang Shangyu lowered his head and flipped through the book in his hand unhurriedly. I see. Merciless' stiff voice suddenly sounded. After I woke up, I always thought that you were eroded by the shadow, or even controlled by the unknown, but now. He looked at the thick and ancient book in Jiang Shangyu's hand. Of course, he knew what it was. This was one of the most powerful divine weapons in the Order camp. Of course, the book that appeared in Jiang Shangyu's hand was not real, but a projection distorted by chaotic rules. But Jiang Shangyu could directly distort the projection of the divine weapon of the Order camp. This level meant that Jiang Shangyu was not eroded by the shadow at all, nor was he controlled by the unknown. His own existence. It was the unknown. Chapter 1157. A very strange feeling came from the thinking center. Wu Qing silently looked at Jiang Shangyu in front of him, and his mind was full of absurd emotions. Jiang Shangyu was unknown. The unknown was Jiang Shangyu. There was no control, no possession, nothing speculated by Time Corridor and War God Realm. Jiang Shangyu might have experienced those speculations before, but now, there was no need to distinguish Jiang Shangyu from the unknown. The two were completely one. Wu Qing couldn't understand how this happened at all. More than half of his memories were still incomplete. But he understood that the unknown was an extremely terrible thing. In the vast starry sky, if the end of the world was the limit of destructive power, then the unknown, in a sense, was the limit of combat power. From the perspective of the three camps, the unknown was not necessarily the strongest, but it was undeniable that the strongest had always been the unknown. This was the real top creature of the starry sky. With Jiang Shangyu? Fusion? It was obvious that Jiang Shangyu still had his own consciousness. And the real shadow creature, their consciousness might be awake, but their self-awareness was constantly changing. This constant change included gender, personality, identity, and even species that could change at any time. But Jiang Shangyu had always been Jiang Shangyu. What did this mean? Wu Qing couldn't understand it at all for a while. And what he couldn't understand was, since Jiang Shangyu was the unknown, why was Miracle City still safe and sound until now? It was undeniable that the human clan and even the entire neutral camp were at a disadvantage in front of Order and Shadow. It could even be said that it was a great disadvantage. Since the existence of the human clan, they had been struggling to survive. They worked hard for their own survival when they knew there was no hope. So far, from Huang Shi to the current Great Emperor Xianyuan, in terms of the overall situation, the human clan had not won. They barely had a sliver of the ability to survive. This was the trump card of the neutral camp. And there were only two most important trump cards in the neutral camp. The first was the real environment. The second was the end of the world. The former could guarantee the return of the strong, and the latter was related to the survival of the camp. Any planet with a real environment. Order and Shadow were thorns in their eyes. If Jiang Shangyu was the unknown, he should destroy Miracle City as soon as possible. But now Miracle City was still safe and sound. Wu Qing was silent and motionless, but his breath was with more and more obvious doubts. I know what you want to ask. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, when you become my divine weapon, I will tell you. He flipped the ancient golden page in his hand. Amidst the rustling sounds, an incomparably dazzling golden light was reflected from the page, establishing a connection with Wu Qing in the unseen world. A few incomparably ancient and majestic words appeared on the golden page. Those words looked like pure and original symbols, but everyone could understand them. The Battle Master Heavenly Lord, Heaven's Equal. Jiang Shangyu's eyes flickered. The connection between those words and Heartless had completely stabilized in that instant. Black blood flowed out of Jiang Shangyu's fingers as he flipped the pages of the book. The blood was like a thread, quickly sketching on the paper. The words, Heavenly Battle, Heavenly Venerate, automatically appeared at the top of the page. Jiang Shangyu gently raised the corner of his mouth. The black blood once again outlined a few symbols that everyone could understand on the golden page. Confer Heartless the title of Shadow Angel and grant him the power of Shadow. Buzz. The whole domain kept surging. In Jiang Shangyu's domain, countless shadow powers appeared around Wu Qing in an instant, enveloping him and trying to merge with him. At this moment, Wu Qing had temporarily lost his divine catastrophe. In the face of erosion, he could not hold on for long. The black blood continued to sketch on the golden page. Confer Heartless the title of Angel of Peace and grant him a peaceful state of mind. Wu Qing's figure suddenly froze, and all his struggles suddenly weakened a lot. The black lines were sketched frantically. Jiang Shangyu's breath gradually declined, and the domain of darkness also began to shake slightly. However, the number of conferments continued to increase. This seemingly gorgeous ancient book was one of the absolute core artifacts in the Order camp. It recorded the Order at the lowest level. The most terrible thing about it was that even the most powerful figures could not escape the influence of the Order in the book. At the same time, it was also an artifact that controlled countless superiors in the Order camp from the neutral camp. At the same time, it was also an artifact that controlled countless superiors who joined the Order camp from the neutral camp. And this book, in the real environment of Zhongzhou State, also had a name that was almost a household name. It was called the List of Deification. Although the List of Deification in Jiang Shangyu's hand was not the real thing, it was just a projection. But at this time, in his domain, even if it was just a projection, it was enough to control Wu Qing for a certain period of time. This was the most worry-saving way. The black domain kept shaking. The golden book in Jiang Shangyu's hand completely burst into a golden light that was hard to look at directly. The light completely pierced the darkness and turned into huge chains of order one after another. All the chains were wrapped around Wu Qing's body, layer after layer. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and looked at Wu Qing, who was constantly struggling in front of him. His eyes were full of expectation. Wu Qing's speculation was not wrong. He was indeed an unknown. But not as Wu Qing thought. Because the unknown did not control him, and he did not devour the unknown. The fusion between the two sides was a natural merger under extremely accidental circumstances. He did not want to completely destroy Miracle City. There were many of his memories here. But the most important reason was that although he was now an unknown, to some extent, he could no longer be regarded as a pure shadow creature. His current state could be said to be unprecedented. It was between the shadow and the neutral camp. This also meant that he could also get what the human clan had always relied on from the real environment. That was what he was studying now. If he could also get the truth, then from the perspective of the shadow camp, he could be regarded as a real change of fate against the will of heaven. If everything went well, then he would become the #1 superior under the whole starry sky. Huang Shi, Shenyuan, God of War, Human Emperor, Doomsday. All the combat effectiveness that could represent the peak would be left far behind by him. Give up resisting. Jiang Shangyu smiled slowly. The golden chain was tied to Wu Qing. Black shadows had spread all over Wu Qing's body. He gradually became quiet. Jiang Shangyu stretched out his hand and made a gesture of holding a sword. Chapter 1158. When Shenyuan Wushang and Xing Tian arrived at the hotel restaurant slowly, Li Tianlan had already eaten the 9th basket of crystal dumplings under Gu Xianyan's stunned gaze. The hotel's crystal dumplings were extremely famous and fragrant. As a large carnivore, Li Tianlan liked them very much. Since he had a second heart, his demand for food had increased day by day. The new heart was not fully formed, so it beat extremely slowly. But every beat consumed a lot of energy, which made Li Tianlan's appetite completely like a bottomless pit. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Li Tianlan wanted, he could eat all day, even for several days, without stopping. So, this child is your spy in Kunlun City a few years ago? Li Tianlan looked at Gu Xianyan and said slowly after taking a sip of sweet soybean milk. Yes. Qin Weibai nodded and smiled. It's not easy at all, especially when I found Xianyan. It took me a lot of time to enter Kunlun City and become Gu Xianyan's student. It seems easy, but in fact, she paused and said with a smile, thank you for your hard work. Xianyan is willing. Gu Xianyan sat beside Qin Weibai with a serious face and said in a soft voice. Li Tianlan looked at her thoughtfully and nodded. She does look a little different. This difference was not in appearance, but in a feeling that Li Tianlan could now perceive but could not describe. This feeling was very faint, but it really existed, clearly telling him that Gu Xianyan was completely different from other people of the same age. Sluck, right? Qin Weibai touched Gu Xianyan's head. And spiritual power. Although Xianyan is young, in terms of spiritual power, she can barely be called a master. Spiritual domain. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly. If I'm fully prepared, I can already hypnotize an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Of course, the hypnotized state of the opponent is not very stable. I have to give them enough hints to form a spiritual cage and then constantly strengthen the cage. Li Tianlan didn't understand at all, but the words, can hypnotize an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and Gu Xianyan's age still had a considerable impact. This could also explain why Gu Xianyan, as a student of Gu Xianyan, could easily get rid of bodyguards and come to Yuzhou with the protection of a master. He nodded in appreciation. Not bad. What Xianyan said today was only a small part of it. She knows a lot of secrets of Kunlun City, which is also the main reason why I put her in Kunlun City. As Qin Weibai spoke, she paused for a moment. A trace of regret appeared on her dreamy and exquisite face, but there was also some contradictory pride on her face. Under normal circumstances, if all these things are exposed, it can completely shake the foundation of Kunlun City, and even make them disappear completely. Unfortunately, she shook her head slightly. Li Tianlan understood what she meant. He also knew what she was feeling sorry for. Li Huaqing's attitude was very obvious. All this was because he and Emperor Dong's palace had grown too fast. Li Tianlan was completely sure that if Emperor Dong's palace hadn't merged with the Flourishing Age Fund, the new group wouldn't have taken shape, and Emperor Dong's palace would still have been developing quietly in Xinyuan City, and he wouldn't have been invincible in the world, but just maintained the combat capability at the peak of the invincible realm. Then the result today would have been different. The speed of his and Emperor Dong's palace's growth was both a good and a bad thing. The integration of the Flourishing Age Fund and Emperor Dong's palace made Emperor Dong's palace the top force in Zhongzhou State. The edge of the Wang family of Beihai was gradually shrinking, and Emperor Dong's palace had influenced all aspects. The Flourishing Age Fund led the new group to enter Tianan, and the strong support of the giant group completely stabilized the new group. Individual combat capability, power scale, wealth, prospects, and potential, Emperor Dong's palace now had everything it wanted. Even the foundation, which might not be enough because of the Li family, was not nothing. Such growth would naturally make the whole Zhongzhou state uneasy. As the president, it was Li Huaqing's most basic responsibility to restrict Emperor Dong's palace, which had nothing to do with personal preferences. So the parliament needed to find an opponent for Li Tianlan. The Wang family of Beihai was naturally not suitable. The other party was not stupid. Now Wang Xingxiao's growth had made up for the shortcomings of the top combat capability of the Wang family of Beihai. After the final battle in Beihai, what they needed to do most was to recuperate and temporarily shrink their edge. Without the Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City was the only choice. Gu Xingyun couldn't stop Li Tianlan. But there was no other candidate in Zhongzhou State now, so it could only be Gu Xingyun. The parliament would definitely increase its support for Kunlun City. When Gu Xingyun gave Li Tianlan more constraints, it would be okay, even if it was only temporary. Li Huaqing expressed such an attitude today. All mistakes, regardless of whether they were absurd or outrageous, had to be suppressed first. Compared with Gu Xingyun, Li Tianlan was a problem they needed to pay more attention to. So now, although Kunlun City seemed to be in a precarious situation, with Li Tianlan's normalcy and the growth of the new group, it was the most stable time since its establishment. At least in a short time, before Zhongzhou State had a better candidate and a way to restrict Li Tianlan, Gu Xingyun's existence was irreplaceable. Because of this, Gu Xianyan only told a small part of the secrets about Kunlun City in front of the giants this time. She did know a lot of things. but it didn't make sense whether she said it or not. Even if the higher-ups knew, they would choose to suppress all these things. So it was better to hide it and let Emperor Dong's palace use these secrets to seek other benefits. It's okay. Li Tianlan smiled and remembered what Li Huaqing said before the meeting ended. He said calmly, I'm waiting for the president to give me an explanation. Qin Weibai touched Gu Xianyan's head unconsciously and suddenly said with a smile, Xianyan will be in Emperor Dong's palace from now on. Tan, what's your plan? Li Tianlan was stunned and then shook his head. I don't have any plan. Get used to it for a while. Just tell me what you want to do. He put the last steamed bun into his mouth. Qin Weibai just wanted to say something. She glanced around and saw Xinyuan Wushang and Xing Tian walking in slowly. Qin Weibai blinked and pulled Gu Xianyan to stand up. She said with a smile, Let's go. I'll take you to see if there are other delicious food. Gu Xianyan agreed and was pulled away by Qin Weibai obediently. Xinyuan Wushang and Xing Tian sat opposite Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan looked at them and said nothing. Ahem, Xinyuan Wushang coughed awkwardly. Big brother, you have a good appetite. Yes. Li Tianlan was calm. What's the matter with Wuqing? What was going on with Wuqing? This was probably the question that every high-level and even countless people in Zhongzhou state were discussing at this time. Li Tianlan didn't know what was going on. But his intuition told him that all this seemed to have something to do with Xinyuan Wushang. Well, Xinyuan Wushang hesitated. Tell me the truth. Li Tianlan said blandly. Xinyuan Wushang coughed again and hesitated. Finally, he said, he went to see Jiang Shangyu. Chapter 1159. Li Tianlan finally realized that there was something wrong with his state. Wu Qin went to find Jiang Shangyu. This was definitely an answer beyond his expectation. But now he was not surprised at all. In other words, he was surprised, but his mood was always as calm as water, without any fluctuation. Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun, the names of the enemies flashed in his mind one by one, but his mood was still calm and indifferent, even a little lazy. Go to find Jiang Shangyu, Li Tianlan calmly agreed and slowly took a bite of the side dish. He seemed to enjoy it very much. This was very peaceful. Xinyuan Wushang was a little helpless and continued, Brother, Jiang Shangyu is problematic. We even think that he will become your strongest opponent here. His threat is much greater than the entire Wang family of Beihai. Wu Qin can feel your thoughts. He locked on to Jiang Shangyu's position and directly took action. Li Tianlan agreed again and said lightly, Jiang Shangyu is no match for Wang Xingxiao now. Li Tianlan was undoubtedly the most qualified to judge the combat capability, especially the combat capability of several peak figures in the Dark World today. From his current perspective, if he didn't count himself, Wang Xingxiao, who was in a special state now, could be regarded as the strongest in the Dark World. After Wang Xingxiao, Li Guangtu, who had recovered from his injury and was in his peak state, could rank second. In a battle of life and death, he might not lose to Wang Xingxiao. After Li Guangtu, it was Lin Fengting in his peak state. Lin Fengting's actual combat power was not lower than Li Guangtu's, but a lifetime of idleness made his character less fierce and cold, and more gentle and leisurely, so he was ranked behind Li Guangtu. After Lin Yuxian, the fourth or fifth place could be Jiang Shangyu's turn. In addition, there was a mysterious master whom Li Tianlan could not figure out for the time being. He had always been thinking about the young man who suddenly rescued Wang Xingxiao above Emperor Dong's palace a few days ago. They were both young, had the same sword energy, and the same reincarnation breaking. Xinyuan Wushang said his name was Lin Shi, but he knew nothing else. Li Tianlan just exchanged a sword move with him and could not judge his strength for the time being. He could only put him behind Jiang Shangyu. Li Tianlan himself. Wang Xingxiao, Li Guangtu, Lin Yuxian, Jiang Shangyu, and Lin Shi. In Li Tianlan's eyes, this was the combat capability that could truly be said to be at the peak level in the Dark World. After Lin Shi, the rest who could be named basically belonged to the second tier of the Dark World. Among the second-tier experts, Wang Xiaoyao was undoubtedly the strongest. This deeply hidden expert at the peak of the invincible realm still had a lot of room for improvement. With Wang Xiaoyao as the leader, Moraid, the commander of the Knights Templars, Flaming Fire, Full Moon Song, Gu Xingyun, Sitangyue, Saint, and Dijiang were all experts at this level. The gap from the Invincible Realm to the peak of the Invincible Realm seemed very big, but if one thought about it carefully, in fact, the gap at the peak level was not small at all. Wang Shengxiao is different from Jiang Shangyu. Xianyuan Wushang said with a grim expression. They are all enemies. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes lazily as if he was about to fall asleep. He said that he was an enemy, but in fact, there was no hostility at all. Xianyuan Wushang smiled bitterly, not knowing what to say. From Li Tianlan's point of view, they were indeed all enemies. But the concept of enemies was completely different. Wang Shengxiao would not be a match for Li Tianlan. At this stage, the gap between them might be infinitely close, but when Qin Weibai woke up, the gap between the two would be completely widened. Only Jiang Shangyu could really threaten Li Tianlan's life. There was no rule in the chaotic state. If there was an extreme case, Jiang Shangyu's strength could grow to the point that no one could contend with in an instant. Taking a step back, even if the human Emperor Palace had conflicts with the space-time corridor, they were all human clan. In the face of major issues, some grievances were just trifles that could be controlled. Only the Dark Shadow and Order were their eternal enemies. Xianyuan Wushang thought for a while and shook his head. It's true that they are all enemies, but the Wang family of Beihai is not in a good situation at present. Wang Shengxiao challenged you to show his strength and tell the Dark World that the Wang family of Beihai has regained its footing. But that's all. The final battle in Beihai caused them heavy losses. This is not only a problem of the loss of hard strength and high-end combat capability, but also their biggest dilemma is the uncertainty of people's hearts. For a long time to come, the Wang family of Beihai is very difficult to expand. They have to stabilize the internal situation, restore the confidence of the people of the Wang family of Beihai, and let the 7 sword-holding families regain control of Beihai. They also have to fight with Wang Qinglei and Wang Xiaoyao. Emperor Dong's palace? They have the will but not the power. But Jiang Shangyu is different. At this stage, he and Gu Xingyun are the few people who can check and balance you. I have confirmed that Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Gu Xingyun have been in contact recently and disappeared mysteriously a few days ago. I don't know what they are plotting. If they reach an agreement, the 3 of them stand together, plus Kunlun City and the Purgatory of Heaven capital, this is already a very luxurious lineup. Brother, even if you are invincible, what are your chances of winning in the face of the 3 of them? The most important thing is that as soon as this force appears, it will be noticed by the Parliament of Zhongzhou State. How will they react then? Li Tianlan smiled, still in a lazy manner. Xianyuan Wushang said in a low voice, Emperor Dong's palace is developing too fast. Brother, the speed of your rise and progress has made everyone think of the risk of losing control. Even if you have been cleared in the case of Chen Fangqing and Chen Shi, their doubts about you will become clear. The current general trend of Zhongzhou State seems to be the upcoming election. In fact, each group and force has its own thoughts. Beihai wants to stabilize the internal situation, the academics wants to expand, the giant group wants to completely reshuffle, the new group wants to rise, and the prince group wants to protect itself. Among the several groups, in addition to the giant group and the ambiguous north group, whether it is the academics who want to expand, the prince group who want to protect itself, the southeast group who want to stabilize the internal situation, or the special warfare group who want to survive, they all have a premise. That is to do their best to limit the development of you and the new group. When a person or a force is too outstanding and dazzling, this is the inevitable situation. So they will definitely extend an olive branch to Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun, and Li Guangtu, and let them check and balance you. Xianyuan Wushang said quickly, Wuqing has gone to Jiang Shangyu, and I personally think that we can't let go of Gu Xingyun and Li Guangtu. We might as well take advantage of this time to do something. Li Tianlan yawned and said slowly, I'm so sleepy. Xianyuan Wushang almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He tried to take a deep breath, looked at Li Tianlan, and subconsciously wanted to sigh. But the moment his eyes fell on Li Tianlan, his whole body suddenly froze. All kinds of authorities were missing. In this state, Li Tianlan was indeed in an extremely bad state, but his potential was completely endless. Xinyuan Wushang looked at it carefully and finally saw the last column. State of divine weapon, isolated. Xinyuan Wushang's face changed dramatically. He suddenly stood up with a livid face. What's wrong? Li Tianlan asked faintly. Xinyuan Wushang's face was uncertain, and he was a little frightened. How could Wuqing be isolated? How could it be possible? Big brother, Xinyuan Wushang gritted his teeth and was just about to speak. An incomparably brilliant light suddenly appeared in the restaurant. Xinyuan Wushang looked up in astonishment. There were colorful colors everywhere in his sight. The gorgeous colors covered the restaurant, and the source was the sky outside the window of the hotel. At the end of the world far away, the colorful light was like a rainbow bridge between heaven and earth, spreading directly from the end of the world to Li Tianlan. Wisps of light kept pouring into Li Tianlan's body. Li Tianlan's laziness gradually disappeared. Xinyuan Wushang felt a sharp and piercingly cold aura that he was very familiar with. Li Tianlan sat up straight and narrowed his eyes. Countless colors flashed in his eyes. The atmosphere in the whole restaurant was solemn. At this moment, he finally felt Wuqing's aura again. Li Tianlan slowly knocked on the table and took a deep look at Xinyuan Wushang. Xinyuan Wushang was dumbfounded, and his eyes were confused. I'll go there. Li Tianlan stood up and said calmly. Covered with brilliant light, he walked straight to the edge of the window. The window shattered without a sound. Li Tianlan stepped on the rainbow bridge that ran through the whole world. It was a huge rainbow that spread from Nanyun province of Zhongzhou state to Yuzhou. It was the brightest rainbow since the founding of the country. Li Tianlan stood firm on the rainbow bridge. The rainbow that ran through most of Zhongzhou state suddenly burst into light. The real distance was modified in an instant. Far became close. Near became far. Li Tianlan took a step forward. The huge rainbow kept shrinking and finally disappeared. The next second, Li Tianlan saw an incomparably dark and twisted forest. Wuqing's aura seemed to be far away, but it also seemed to be close at hand. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment, and finally, the corners of his mouth rose and he sneered. Ta. Chapter 1161. The golden light and the darkness were constantly entangled in the gloomy domain. The battle, which lasted less than 3 minutes from beginning to end, was over. Or it was a stalemate. Jiang Shangyu, surrounded by golden light and dark shadows, lowered his head and silently turned the pages of the book. The light and shadow whistled and rose around him, and the pages turned faster and faster. Wuqing had completely calmed down. All the light on his body had completely dissipated. At this time, he was sitting quietly on the ground, silently fighting against the chains of order entangled on his body. He maintained the form of order and returned to the most essential state. Wuqing turned into a stone. His figure was motionless in the dark domain. His figure, completely exposed in front of Jiang Shangyu, looked like a monkey. A stone monkey. Jiang Shangyu frowned slightly. The pages of the list of deification were turned like the wind. Black blood kept flowing out of his fingertips, adding line after line of handwriting on the ancient golden pages. Wuqing just looked at him silently. He returned to the state of the skymending stone and froze in place. His hairy face was expressionless, but there was a touch of sarcasm in his eyes before they froze. I'm the one who thought too simply. Jiang Shangyu flipped through the book in his hand and said in a flat voice. As the most core divine artifact in the order camp, the importance of the list of deification was self-evident. But to be fair, the power of this book was actually not outstanding. Many so-called divine artifacts that were not the core could cause more destruction than the list of deification. But the core function of the list of deification was almost irreplaceable. In a sense, it was also unique. The list of deification could have a direct impact on the peak combat power of each camp. Just this point alone was enough to make everyone tremble in fear. This also represented the peak of its level. Under the starry sky, the peak was God. The list of deification could be conferred as a god, which was a huge boost, but also a huge limitation. This was something built by the bottom rules of the world. To some extent, every time it was conferred, it could be said to be an increase in combat power. Accepting this kind of conferment was equivalent to accepting a certain order that needed to be protected by the conferment. Jiang Shangyu used his own chaotic rules to distort the positive effect of the conferment of the list of deification and further increased his negative effect. In the shortest time, he limited Wu Qing's combat capability and then almost destroyed all his energy. But the divine seal decree here was only a projection. Even if Jiang Shangyu was in his heyday, he could not distort the order on the real list of deification. He could distort the projection and suppress Ruthless, but he could not turn Ruthless into a shadow creature in a short time. Wu Qing became a heaven-mending stone. What was the heaven-mending stone? The number 1 divine weapon of the neutral faction. Jiang Shangyu naturally had such an impression in his mind. But what exactly was the heaven-mending stone? There were very few creatures that could answer this question. Right now, the heaven-mending stone was right next to him. It was clearly visible, but the state it was displaying was as if it didn't exist at all. There were no molecules or atomic particles. Naturally, there was no possibility of contamination or transformation. Jiang Shangyu searched his chaotic memory, trying to know how he had polluted the core of King Wei. But after thinking for a long time, he had no clue. Thus, the battle came to a complete stalemate. He could not do anything to Wu Qing for a while, and Wu Qing naturally could not do anything to him. Jiang Shangyu was still turning the page. The surging golden light suddenly sped up. A grain of golden sand drifted out from the page. Jiang Shangyu froze and subconsciously looked at Wu Qing. Wu Qing's body was still frozen, but Jiang Shangyu felt that the sarcasm in the corner of his eyes seemed to be a little stronger. Another grain of golden sand drifted out from the page. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack appeared on the page. The cracks began to expand, densely packed, and in the blink of an eye, they spread to the golden book. The countless titles left by the black blood on the page were being erased one by one. The consciousness of the list of deification clearly felt that it was being used as a projection, and it was instinctively destroying everything across an endless distance. The sequence chain on Wu Qing's body began to decrease. Jiang Shangyu looked at the pair of sarcastic eyes in front of him and suddenly laughed. What's the use? Although I can't use the list of deification now, your energy is less than 1/10 of it. How much combat power do you have now? The peak of the thunder-shocking realm? The invincible realm? The strongest is only at the peak of the invincible realm. Do you think you are my opponent? Wu Qing was motionless. But the stone-like skin on his body began to gradually recover, and the frozen eyes began to change from sarcasm to fierceness again. Before your energy recovers, I will make you a shadow creature. Buzz? Before Jiang Shangyu could finish his words, there was a sudden scream in the world in the domain. A sharp buzz. Wu Qing, who obviously hadn't gotten rid of the shackles of order, suddenly stood up. The collapsing order directly left countless scars on his body. But Wu Qing, who was impatient and furious, had already taken out the rod and smashed it directly at Jiang Shangyu's head. There were many shadows of the rod. There were illusory shadows of the rod everywhere in the domain. They seemed light, but in fact, every blow was as powerful as a thunderbolt. The rod vibrated wildly in Wu Qing's hand. In less than a second, no one knew how many times Wu Qing had attacked with his last energy. Jiang Shangyu's body was completely broken in the violent attack. The black mist diffused without any pattern. A black rain fell in the recondensed domain. The rain fell unscrupulously, falling on the ground. The originally verdant grass began to spread crazily. Thorns grew out of the grass and leaves turned into giant trees, and the giant trees turned into jungles. Everything was growing irregularly. More black raindrops poured down. One by one, Jiang Shangyu walked out of the twisted jungle that was formed again. All the Jiang Shangyu rushed forward at the same time, desperately rushing to Wu Qing. There were tens of thousands of them. Looking from above, it looked like groups of locusts were madly attacking Wu Qing's body. Wu Qing carried the iron rod on his shoulder, and pulled a few short golden hairs from his furry face with an expressionless face. The short hairs floated slightly in his hand. Wu Qing blew gently. Countless microorganisms began to gather in his hands. Then they jumped down from his palms and rapidly grew in size. At the same time, they also turned into Heartless who were wielding clubs. Countless Wu Qing and countless Jiang Shangyu charged at each other at the same time. In the twisted jungle, there were entangled black shadow creatures and golden monkeys everywhere. The one-on-one killing seemed to become a real war in an instant. The golden light in Wu Qing's eyes shone. More and more monkeys appeared around him, all of which looked exactly like him. In this state he could not distinguish Jiang Shangyu. And Jiang Shangyu could not distinguish his real body either. Before the real bodies of the two sides met, both of them could be said to be absolutely safe. And this was the situation that Wu Qing wanted. Chapter 1162. Dead silence, cold, and weird. A large piece of dark space was constantly fluctuating in front of him. The space was constantly twisting, changing its shape. It changed shape, turned into a fortress, turned into a sky full of artillery fire, turned into a city, and finally turned into ruins. There was no sound, and there was an indescribable silence between heaven and earth. Colorful rays of light flickered in and out of the darkness. The darkness was torn apart for a moment. As soon as the soaring sword energy rushed out, a thicker darkness completely sealed the space again. The colorful light disappeared and was replaced by golden light. The golden light and the darkness merged together, looking gorgeous and evil. The whole space seemed to have become an extremely gorgeous and grand curtain. Li Kuangtu stared at the constantly fluctuating dark space and had been silent for a long time. With his vision, he could naturally see what this space meant. It was an unbelievably sturdy domain. It was extremely resilient and ever-changing, but it was unbreakable. In today's dark world, Jiang Shangyu could be said to be the first person in the domain. Li Kuangtu also recognized this very much. He combined a bunch of messy unique skills in the domain into a unique skill that belonged to him and surpassed the power of the peak of the invincible realm. Li Kuangtu believed that even if he was in Jiang Shangyu's domain, he would suffer a loss if he was not careful. But even so, for Li Kuangtu, who had studied swordsmanship all his life, Jiang Shangyu's domain was very strong, but it was not really unbreakable. If he went all out, he had at least 60% confidence to kill Jiang Shangyu at the cost of serious injury. Li Kuangtu had always thought so. But this impression was completely broken in this domain today. No one could see what was happening in the domain. A large piece of light was constantly shining, as if a domain of heaven and earth had formed a city, enveloped the village, and isolated everyone. It seemed to have become a battlefield for Jiang Shangyu alone. Li Tianlong? Li Kuangtu suddenly asked. Maybe. Gu Xingyun glanced at Li Kuangtu's body intentionally or unintentionally, as if he was looking for his weakness, with an undisguised malice. He just accepted the rules of the shadow, but he could not be regarded as a complete shadow creature. But under the influence of Jiang Shangyu's domain, he also had the capital to get rid of the real environment. This was the base that Jiang Shangyu had carefully cultivated for many years. His fighting strength could reach its peak here, and Gu Xingyun's fighting strength could also reach its strongest state. Therefore, at this moment, although Gu Xingyun's realm was still at the peak of the invincible realm, the strength he exerted in the base was almost the same as Li Kuangtu's. Most importantly, Li Kuangtu was injured. In such a situation, Gu Xingyun had even begun to fantasize about the possibility of killing Li Kuangtu more than once. Li Kuangtu seemed to sense something. He frowned and looked back at Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun still looked at him maliciously and did not give in at all. If you want to fight, you can try. Li Kuangtu said plainly, otherwise, you'd better put away your face. You look like a wild dog that doesn't know how to restrain its emotions. It's very disgusting. Don't challenge my patience. If you keep looking at me like that, I'll dig your dog eyes out. Are you sure? Gu Xingyun grinned. Xing! The sound of countless swords being unsheathed rang out from within the village. Li Kuangtu's eyes suddenly condensed, and his aura soared. The violent sword energy between heaven and earth appeared out of thin air. A void but absolutely dazzling sharpness directly gathered in front of Li Kuangtu. Gu Xingyun smiled strangely. He said something that he had never said to Li Kuangtu in his life. More than 20 years ago, he didn't even dare to have a similar idea. Even if he succeeded in overthrowing Li Kuangtu, overthrowing the Li family, and becoming the god of war of Zhongzhou state, he didn't have a similar idea. However, in this base that was filled with the radiation of the shadow rule, he naturally said something that even he would have thought to be extremely arrogant before. Do you want to die? In the extremely quiet village, the doors of every household and every villager in the streets and alleys opened at the same time. Li Kuangtu's eyes suddenly condensed. Gu Xingyun's provocation almost hit his face. For Li Kuangtu, who had been looking down on Gu Xingyun, this was the most unbearable thing. The endless sharpness shone more brightly. Li Kuangtu's aura soared to his current strongest state in an instant. Facing a formidable enemy? The enemy was unknown? The outcome was unpredictable? This was never Li Kuangtu's test. It was something to worry about. He, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Xingyun were just partners, not subordinates of anyone. Since Gu Xingyun didn't care about the so-called overall situation, why should he care? I always feel that there are some problems with our cooperation. Jiang Shangyu can occupy 30% of the Special Warfare Agency of Zhongzhou State, and I occupy 40%. As for you, a traitor, why do you want 30%? Not all of the Special Warfare Agency of Zhongzhou State belongs to me, and I always need some other voices. I think we should give some space to other groups. And this space will come from you. What do you think? Gu Xingyun laughed and said, I'll give you 10%, no more. Li Kuangtu took a deep breath and didn't speak. There was no need to speak. Without any hesitation, he directly raised his palm. Boom! Thousands of sword energy flew straight down like a wild stream. The violent sword energy rushed directly to Gu Xingyun without any reservation. The dark light in front of Gu Xingyun shone, and a domain was formed in an instant. Countless sword energy hit the domain in front of Gu Xingyun. Li Kuangtu's eyes flashed, and he strode forward. He raised his hands at the same time. His 10 fingers moved slightly, and the residual shadows flickered. The sword energy between heaven and earth changed completely. The ninth sky was endless. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 different kinds of sword energy flew in an instant. Li Kuangtu suddenly pointed forward. Different sword energy and different sword intents gathered into a dazzling flowing light at the same time. The sword light pierced into Gu Xingyun's domain. At the same time, outside the village, outside Jiang Shangyu's domain, at the edge of the twisted forest, Li Tunlan, with a cold face, pressed his palm directly on a thick and twisted tree. There was a sudden roar. Countless rays of light emerged directly from Li Tianlan's hands. The sword light was unscrupulous, sweeping through heaven and earth and spreading wildly in all directions. Li Kuangtu and Gu Xingyun's expressions changed dramatically almost at the same time. The sword energy and sword intents around them turned almost at the same time, and countless forces began to spread to the periphery of the base. Farther away, with Li Tianlan as the center, the fierce sword light shattered everything. It seemed that in just a moment, the extremely bright light had completely illuminated the darkness. Chapter 1163. It was mighty and the world was turned upside down. There was no word that could accurately describe the destructive power of this moment. At the edge of the twisted forest, the light on Li Tianlan's body had completely disappeared. Pieces of transparent space waves flew unscrupulously in all directions with him as the center. Messy, violent, ostentatious, and fierce. Li Kuangtu's sword light, Gu Xingyun's domain, ruthless energy, and even the rules executed by Jiang Shangyu were all gathering toward him uncontrollably. The powerful force destroyed everything in the twisted forest at an incredible speed. This was a power that could penetrate heaven and earth and crush everything. The space kept twisting, turning into ripples, becoming faster and faster, turning into a raging tide, and finally completely turning into a tsunami between heaven and earth. Boom! Heaven and earth shook together. The twisted forest trembled clearly, and the tsunami-like space ripples swept in all directions. A large number of giant black trees began to disappear at the same time, turning into black powder all over the sky, and then turning into nothingness in an instant. There was nothing in front of Li Tianlan, no obstacles. He looked at everything around him casually. Everything he could see and couldn't see, in all directions, everything around him, all turned into nothingness and emptiness in his sword energy. The piercingly cold killing intent continued to surge, reaching the peak in a flash, and then completely crossing the peak without any pause. It was easy without any obstacles. In the domain that initially got rid of the real environment, Jiang Shangyu would become stronger, and so would Li Tianlan. In a stronger state, Li Tianlan's mind became clearer. He hated everything here instinctively. He couldn't tell why, but the first time he saw the twisted forest, all he could think of was destruction. His instinct drove him to do his best to destroy everything. Dense space ripples continued to spread. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows, and his voice ran through the whole twisted forest in an instant. The sword energy here is enhanced. His mind suddenly focused, and the power inside and outside his body was completely boiling. His blood was flowing and roaring, and his bones were completely tense. His great willpower was shaking with endless power. At this moment, Li Tianlan's willpower was completely integrated with heaven and earth. The physical rules about power were slightly modified for a moment. Chaotic and mournful cries instantly filled the sky. The space ripples formed by the sword energy whistled and became more and more violent at a rate visible to the naked eye. The space around Li Tianlan had been completely shattered, and the darkness of nothingness seemed to have swallowed him up. The ripples of the sword energy, which were as fast as lightning, emerged around him with a large number of shadows. They tore through the forest, rushed to the sky, and went deep into the ground. One after another, arcs of sword chi covered every inch of space. Dust flew everywhere. In all directions, countless huge black trees were slashed into the air and turned into nothingness. Every single weed on the ground was completely crushed. The sword chi, which had been strengthened by several times, completely lifted up the surface of the ground over 10,000 meters. Smoke and dust covered the entire forest. The sword energy around Li Tianlan had completely formed a torrent visible to the naked eye, rushing forward. The forest disappeared completely in the mighty sword chi. In an extremely distant place, the boundless sword intent encountered a clear and tenacious obstruction. Countless sword chi struck the barrier and slid in another direction. The barrier seemed to be extremely far away, but it also seemed to be only one step away. It was chaotic, vague, and unclear. Li Tianlan's voice echoed in the sky again, like clear thunder, and could be heard between heaven and earth. The domain is forbidden here. The vague domain in his consciousness suddenly stiffened. The space around him seemed to have completely turned into sharp sword energy in an instant. There was no space in the world, only sword intent, sword light, and sword energy. This was the world of swords. The voice echoing between heaven and earth was passionate and wanton, with arrogance and confidence. The swordsmanship is supreme here. Crack, boom. The moment the clear cracking sound rang out, it was followed by an earth-shattering explosion. The surging sword light tore apart the stiff obstruction in an instant. The darkness disappeared, the vagueness disappeared, and the chaos disappeared. In Li Tianlan's sight, a domain that had been solidified to the extreme was completely shattered under the impact of the sword light, bringing up black fog all over the sky. The black fog floated and was completely absorbed by the sword light, turning into power. All the power was consumed crazily. The sword energy was strengthened. The domain was forbidden. The swordsmanship was supreme. This was the swordsmanship law that belonged to Li Tianlan. In the absence of ruthlessness, in this space that was vaguely separated from the real environment, Li Tianlan's combat capability vaguely broke away from some kind of restraint. Combined with the physical rules he had unintentionally analyzed in Yuzhou, he turned the area within a radius of hundreds of meters into his own battlefield in the blink of an eye. In this battlefield, the law he uttered was the will of heaven and earth. This was the preliminary advanced use of his own power after it was separated from the real environment. To some extent, it was also the preliminary outbreak of compressing his own power and will. 3 laws, 3 outbursts, and Li Tianlan's aura completely fell to the lowest point. Endless exhaustion and trance began to appear, and Li Tianlan's body trembled and shook slightly. But all the weakness only lasted for less than half a second, not even half a second. Bang! A loud heartbeat suddenly rang out. In the right ventricle, the second heart beat violently, and the majestic power with abundant vitality directly filled his whole body. This power was extremely violent. Li Tianlan could even clearly feel that his blood vessels were shaken to crack, and drops of blood seeped out of his skin. But his whole physical strength and spirit returned to the peak state again after this heartbeat. Puff! The battle in the domain, or even the killing of the war, was completely over. The surging and endless sword energy completely tore the domain of darkness in the most violent way. Jiang Shangyu's domain was directly broken into nothingness all over the sky. There was no sign. There was no time to react. Countless Jiang Shangyu were suppressing a large number of ruthlessness and closing in step by step. In the same second, all the Jiang Shangyu were frozen in place. And countless ruthlessness began to disappear. There was silence in the domain. A transparent wave tore open a corner of the domain and rushed in. Then the transparent waves surged wildly, and in an instant, colorful sword light appeared directly. The shadow was disappearing. Reality became the main theme. One by one, Jiang Shangyu suddenly exploded and turned into thick black mist. In the center of the crowd, Jiang Shangyu, who was hidden in a group of doppelgangers, suddenly turned pale. The corner of his mouth moved, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The red blood mixed with wisps of black fell on the ground. The domain was broken inch by inch. More and more sword energy roared inside the domain. Doppelgangers. Weeds, woods, and cities. Wherever the sword light passed, it was invincible and broke everything. Everything in front of the sword light was shattered. Jiang Shangyu covered his heart. His face became a little ferocious, and he stared in the direction outside the domain. He felt the extreme reality. It was the mortal enemy of order and the dark shadow. The real environment completely shattered his domain, and all the rules of the dark shadow in the domain were firmly suppressed. It was already self-evident who the newcomer was. Li Tianlan. An extremely cold voice sounded directly from the domain. Heaven and earth were shattering. The domain was disappearing, the city was collapsing, and the crowd was vanishing. The ruthlessness in the state of order also disappeared. The real environment spread everywhere. The ruthlessness changed from the state of order to the dark and majestic Shenyuan Feng again. The black color of the blood flowing from the corner of Jiang Shangyu's mouth began to disappear, and it became red and mournful. Jiang Shangyu's combat capability, which had initially gotten rid of the real environment, was once again suppressed to a level beyond the peak of the invincible realm. The real environment became an extremely solid pull. The sword Tao law that Li Tianlan temporarily used also began to disappear with the disappearance of the dark shadow and the chaotic rules. The twisted forest was also disappearing. The breeze blew through the jungle. It was earth-shattering, and a mess. Everything had disappeared. Li Tianlan stood in an extremely dense forest. The forest was green and natural. The twisted and dark forest seemed to have never existed at all. Jiang Shangyu stood less than 10 meters away from Li Tianlan. On the opposite side of Jiang Shangyu, the dark Shenyuan Feng floated quietly, exuding sharp sword intent. Less than 50 meters behind Jiang Shangyu was an extremely vague village. Gu Xingyun and Li Kuangtu were walking out of the somewhat vague village that did not seem to belong to this world with solemn faces. Li Tianlan was expressionless. He stood in the jungle and did not seem to have the aura of a strong man at all. Even in the perception of Jiang Shangyu and the others, Li Tianlan's existence was illusory. He raised his hand slightly. Ruthless turned slightly in the air, made a whistling sound, and fell directly into his hand. The huge black sword edge of Xianyuan Feng instantly stretched and split, turning into an extremely grand but extremely delicate sword formation, surrounding Li Tianlan in the center. One after another, delicate small swords rotated around him, like shining stars. Li Tianlan's aura became more and more illusory. Jiang Shangyu's figure stood up little by little. He raised his hand and slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He stared at Li Tianlan but did not speak. Instead, he began to retreat little by little. Li Tianlan just watched quietly and did not make a move. The atmosphere in the forest became extremely strange in an instant. Li Guangtu, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Xingyun. The three of them stood together, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. At the level of these three people, they could all see Li Tianlan's current state. It was not that Li Tianlan had no aura at all. Instead, his aura had become so strong that it had become one with the real environment of the whole world. It had become so strong that it was difficult to detect. This was Li Tianlan in the current real environment. There was no sword Tao Law. There was no ruthless with abundant energy. There was only himself. But even if the divine weapon in his hand had no energy, he was still a real invincible man standing here. Chapter 1164. A breeze blew through the forest. The wind was soft. In the warm and somewhat stuffy primeval forest of Nanyuan, the biting cold drew clear ravines on the ground. Crack! A few giant trees nearby toppled over without warning. Before the thick trunks fell to the ground, they had been broken into pieces in the air. The broken tree trunk rolled casually, revealing the densely packed growth rings. More and more trees fell down without a sound. The incisions of each broken tree were extremely smooth, neat, and awe-inspiring. The breeze continued to float, with more and more sword energy. The cold sword intent gradually filled every inch of space. As the wind passed, Jiang Shangyu could even clearly feel the sharp edge seem to be cutting his domain. He stared deeply at Li Tianlan, his eyes flashing, and his face was a little uncertain. His strongest dark domain had been completely shattered by Li Tianlan. After the domain was shattered, although he was not seriously injured, he had temporarily lost his biggest reliance. That was the authority and rules of the Dark Shadow. He was able to suppress Heartless at his peak because this was the base he had been running for many years. It could be said to be one of his most important trump cards. He had spent close to 15 years building up the Shadow Order here bit by bit, forming this base. In this area, his domain would be greatly amplified, and it even vaguely had the feeling of forming a world of its own. The so-called forming a world of its own was to get rid of the real environment and make the most of the unknown chaotic authority. In this state, he could completely suppress everything in the chaos. Now his domain was completely torn by Li Tianlan, and the Dark Shadow Order built inside the base was also severely damaged. His combat capability was again suppressed by the real environment. Facing Li Tianlan in this state, no matter whether he won or lost, this was not the situation Jiang Shangyu wanted to encounter. From the moment he felt ruthless hostility, Jiang Shangyu had a clear plan, so he took out all his trump cards and suppressed Ruthless with the strongest posture. Jiang Shangyu did not care about the consequences at all. As long as he could get Ruthless, he would give up this base. Once Ruthless fell in the dark and became a divine weapon of the Dark Shadow Camp, then with Ruthless in his hand he could fight against Li Tianlan at any realm under any circumstances. The problem of Heartless not having enough energy was not a problem at all in the chaotic order. He would defeat Emperor Dong's palace head-on with ruthlessness and make Li Tianlan fall completely. He would create his own brand and legend in the real environment and become the first unknown person to touch the truth since ancient times. He could even use Heartless and his own imprint to cast the entire Miracle City into darkness, allowing him to find the greatest secret of the neutral faction, World's End. Jiang Shangyu had high expectations for this. He was certain that the space-time corridor would not be able to determine his condition, and Heartless would not know. As long as he gave it his all, taking down Heartless was only a matter of time. He used the chaotic order to invade the Heartless fate, and together with him, they squandered the Heartless energy. This was the first step. In order to resist the influence of chaos, Heartless could only turn himself into a state of absolute order. In this way, he could break free from the chaotic rules, but he would also be unable to accommodate Huang Shi's half-divine form when he entered the state of absolute order. Without the protection of the half-divine form, there was a possibility that Heartless would be contaminated. Therefore, Jiang Shangyu no longer held back. He simulated the projection of the list of deification, suppressed Wu Qing, and forced him to reveal his nature. In the end, the stalemate of the war would inevitably end with Jiang Shangyu's victory. In fact, at the moment when the domain was broken, Jiang Shangyu had already gained a considerable advantage. In less than 2 hours at most, or even an hour and a half, the shadow rules in his domain could completely suppress Heartless. As long as he could do this, Jiang Shangyu's plan would be considered a success. He would give up this base, take Heartless away immediately, hide, and contaminate Heartless completely. This process might take a long time, decades, centuries, or even millennia. But a few years was nothing to him. He could use his authority to disrupt the flow of time in his body. His millennia, compared to the time in Miracle City, might only be a few months, or at most a year or two. During this time, Jiang Shangyu in this space-time would replace him to walk outside. Once he had complete control over Heartless, no one would be able to stop his edge. But Li Tianlan came. Jiang Shangyu was not surprised by this. Even if Li Tianlan and Wu Qing were both in a state of recovery, or even a state where they had not truly recovered, but since the beginning of time, the bond between a man and a sword had long been engraved in their bones. He forced out the half-divine form in Wu Qing's body, but he was powerless to stop it. In this way, the only direction the half-divine form could go was Li Tianlan. Once the divine form merged with Li Tianlan, the other party would be able to detect his position in an instant. So Li Tianlan would definitely come. So Jiang Shangyu was ready to give up this base. All of this was within his expectations. But the only thing that Jiang Shangyu did not expect was Li Tianlan's speed. Li Tianlan came too fast. From the moment the divine form left Heartless to Yuzhou, Jiang Shangyu had a clear analysis. Taking into account a series of influences such as the real environment, the shadow order, and the resonance factor between the divine form and the real environment, the precise time for the divine form to leave Heartless and arrive at Yuzhou should be 5 minutes and 12 seconds. Among them, the divine form needed 5 minutes to fly over the twisted forest. In other words, it only took 12 seconds for the divine form to appear in the real environment and merge with Li Tianlan in Yuzhou. And the time when Li Tianlan arrived at the edge of the twisted forest was 5 minutes and 16 seconds after the divine form left Heartless. For seconds, Li Tianlan crossed a distance of thousands of miles from Yuzhou to the periphery of the twisted forest on the edge of Nanyun in one step. These 4 seconds also included the time when Li Tianlan locked the position of the twisted forest. In other words, the time when Li Tianlan arrived at the twisted forest from Yuzhou was only about 1 to 2 seconds. That was the time when he took a step. Plane? Rocket? Supersonic cruise? With the development of modern science, there was no technology that could make Li Tianlan appear here in such a short time. The only possibility for such a situation to happen was that it was real. Jiang Shangyu subconsciously gritted his teeth. It was something that made the Dark Shadow and Order camps gnash their teeth in hatred. It was also the biggest reliance of the human clan to survive until now. It was also something that the Dark Shadow and Order absolutely could not have under normal circumstances. The figures who could stand at the top of the neutral camp all had their own real brand. To some extent, this could be said to be the biggest secret of the neutral camp. It was said that the Real was related to the end of the world. It was said that the Real was the key to samsara. It was said that the Real was the ultimate goal of the human clan. It was said that there were too many rumors waiting for the two hostile camps to study. The real environment, the real brand, these things had now become Jiang Shangyu's goals, and they were what he desired most. Li Tianlan could cross thousands of miles in the real environment in one step, which was essentially equivalent to some kind of space transfer technology. The real brand on his body interacted with the real environment at that moment and merged with each other. At the moment of fusion, the world was real, and Li Tianlan was illusory. The real and illusory merged with each other. Li Tianlan became the real environment. The real environment also became Li Tianlan. So the real environment erased Li Tianlan in Yuzhou, and then Li Tianlan's real body descended in Nanyun in a way similar to projection. It sounded really incredible. Li Tianlan should not have this ability at present. But the half-divine form that originally belonged to him and merged with him at this time definitely had this ability. So the real came. The order and the dark shadow all collapsed. Li Tianlan regained control of Xianyuan Feng and appeared in front of them. As he slowly retreated step by step, Jiang Shangyu completely stood together with Gu Xingyun and Li Guangtu. Xianyuan Feng buzzed, and the sword energy was rampant. Jiang Shangyu took a deep look at Li Tianlan. Countless complicated lights flickered in his eyes. In an instant he disrupted the authority of order and turned himself into order. Special energy found. Insufficient authority, unable to analyze. Jiang Shangyu was not surprised. His eyes immediately fell on Xianyuan Feng, which was revolving around Li Tianlan. Special energy found. Do you want to analyze? Analyzing in progress 6%. 19%. 38%. 67%. 89%. 100%. Preliminary analysis completed. Due to insufficient authority, analysis is limited. Do you want to order? Order was the clearest rule, the absolute law, and it was clear at a glance. The light in Jiang Shangyu's eyes flashed slightly. The next moment, countless data were directly imprinted in his pupils. The completion of the analysis is seriously insufficient, and some information cannot be ordered. Part of the target information has been ordered. Jiang Shangyu's eyes gradually became empty, and the focus of his eyes was on the large piece of data that only he could see. Target, Mend Heaven Stone, Divine Weapon State, Sword Formation Form, Level 4 Sword Formation, 13 floors. Evolution Destination, Mend Heaven Stone, incomplete. The pillar of the ancient human clan, the cornerstone of the world, the forbidden divine weapon. State, Preliminary Recovery, Official Return. Current progress, 17%. Details, serious memory loss, body incomplete, core separated, energy dried up. Details, serious damage. Vitality, suppressed by the real environment. Combat strength, suppressed by the real environment. Weakness, energy, body, will. Natural enemy, order. Shut up. Combat power, 35,000. Incomplete state, extremely suppressed by the real environment. Sword form, attack power, 23,000, 35,000. Attack speed, plus 60%. Critical hit rate, plus 100%. Critical hit damage, plus 150%. All attributes, plus 99. Absolutely suppressed by the real environment. Sword form, attack power, 15,000, 22,000. Attack speed, plus 150%. Critical hit rate, plus 100%. Critical hit damage, plus 90. All attributes, plus 99. Every divine weapon in the sword formation can trigger a characteristic that can be repeated. Absolutely suppressed by the real environment. Sky halberd form, attack power, 30,000, 50,000. Attack speed, plus 20. Critical hit rate, plus 100%. Critical hit damage, plus 300. Strength, plus 180. Agility, plus 180. Absolutely suppressed by the real environment. Cloak form, attack power, 10,000, 10,000. Defense power, 50,000, 50,000. Mental defense power, 35,000, 40,000. Shield power, 30,000. Shadow resistance, plus 300%. Order resistance, plus 300%. Neutral resistance, plus 300%. Health power, plus 9. Mental defense power, plus 300%. Immune to true damage. Absolutely suppressed by the real environment. Neutral form, King Guard strength, 850. Agility, 930. Stamina, 5000. Spirit, 800. Intelligence, 700. Speed, 999. Critical hit damage? Characteristics? Exclusive, super neutral halo. Advanced order halo. Absolutely suppressed by the real environment. Overall characteristics: Emperor, attack speed plus 100%, critical hit damage plus 1000%, attack power plus 1000%, ignores all defense, all resistances, and all shields. Requires divine form. Catastrophe, unactivated. Unpredictable grace, attack speed plus 3000%, speed plus 3000%, sword aura radiation speed plus 3000%, ignores block, ignores defense. Requires divine form, heaven smiting, unactivated. Twilight of the Gods, damage to any order health increased by 1500%, ignores the target's level, 20% chance of triggering 3 times the damage. Attacks in any environment can replenish energy and increase HP. Requires divine form, extinction, unactivated. Dark Saint Spear, damage to any shadow health increased by 100% to 3000%, ignores the target's level, 5% to 50% chance of triggering 3 to 8 times the damage. Attacks in any environment can replenish energy and increase HP. Requires divine form, extinction, unactivated. Sunset, passive characteristic. Attacks in any environment cannot be dodged. Heaven Underworld, attacks in any environment can deal true damage to the target. Every 3 true damage will trigger double true damage. Attack speed plus 600%. Endless Sky, ignores spatial isolation. Requires divine form, extinction, unactivated. Shadow Ripper, creates a constant real space, shapes real rules, distorts souls, annihilates souls. Rebirth and resurrection in any sense have no effect. Requires divine form, 9 deaths, unactivated. Authority? Owner of divine weapon, Huangshi. Compatibility, 100%. Current owner of divine weapon, Li Tianlan. Compatibility, 99%. Suppressed by real environment. Current environment, real environment 100%. Warning, detected that the current environment is real. Divine stone, incomplete, is absolutely suppressed. Characteristic has not been activated. Basic attributes reduced. Warning, detected that divine stone, incomplete, has a very high compatibility with its owner. When fighting in a real environment, there is an extremely low chance of activating the divine form. Warning, detected that divine stone, incomplete, has a very high compatibility with its owner. When fighting in a real environment, the basic attributes of divine stone, incomplete, will increase. For every 1% reduction in the real environment, the basic attributes of divine stone, incomplete, will double. No upper limit. Warning, for every 1% reduction in the real environment, the probability of activating the divine form and characteristic will increase by 0.001%. Jiang Shangyu sucked in a breath of cold air, and his eyes became more and more stern. The data he had barely analyzed was about 1/10 of all the data of Ruthless in the real environment. But even so, it still had a great impact on his heart. Ruthless now had less than 1/10 of his energy, but even if he had no energy at all, he was still the best divine weapon in the world. Especially when he was held in Li Tianlan's hand, the degree of compatibility was almost 100%. This meant that if not only Wu Qing had appeared in his domain, but also Li Tianlan, under the influence of the real environment, his own strength could be infinitely close to the supreme realm, and Wu Qing's basic attributes would multiply without limit. In that case, not to mention the consequences of activating the divine form, even if Li Tianlan was an ordinary person, a casual slash with the Shenyuan blade in his hand would be enough to completely tear his domain apart. Jiang Shangyu's face was a little gloomy. Although his shadow rules had suffered a heavy blow, it was not a setback. Jiang Shangyu originally planned to condense the domain again, so that this space could be separated from the real environment again, so that he and Gu Xingyun could become stronger. But after seeing the analysis of Ruthless, he had completely dispelled this idea. Once again out of the real environment, facing Li Tianlan with Shenyuan blade in his hand, unless he was ruthless enough to destroy Miracle City, he would be courting death. Almost in an instant, Jiang Shangyu determined the policy to treat Li Tianlan in the future. He could only use real combat capability to deal with Li Tianlan in the real environment. This was undoubtedly extremely difficult. But no matter how difficult it was much better than suicide. The wind inside the forest was getting colder and colder. Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Kuangtu beside him, and then at Jiang Shangyu beside him. His somewhat gloomy and cold voice suddenly sounded, extremely firm and decisive. "You two, come at me together." Gu Xingyun and Li Kuangtu's eyes froze at the same time. The sword formation rotated around Li Tianlan. In the center of the sword formation, Li Tianlan, expressionless, took a deep look at Li Kuangtu. Li Kuangtu met his gaze without dodging. "Ha!" Li Tianlan finally spoke. His voice was ethereal and majestic. "Have you really made up your mind?" "What do you mean?" Li Kuangtu's eyes flashed. Li Tianlan said lightly, "From childhood to adulthood, everything I have borne and carried, in terms of the root cause, is to investigate the truth of your treason, to prove your innocence, to prove the innocence of the Li family, and to let our Li family stand on the peak of the dark world again. Before the establishment of Emperor Dong's palace, this was all my responsibility. After the establishment of Emperor Dong's palace, I have done what I should do. If you want, I can reverse the verdict of your treason at any time. For more than 20 years, I have not let anyone down in the Li family." Li Tianlan floated in the air and looked down at Li Kuangtu. "What about you? What did you do? And now, in this case, from what standpoint do you stand on the opposite side of me? Look around you. The enemy who made you bear the infamy of treason and destroyed the whole Li family is beside you. You are actually cooperating with him to deal with the Li family? The Li family is dead. Only the Li family under my control is the real Li family. Our glory doesn't need an outsider like you to restore. I, and my purgatory of heaven capital, can do everything." Li Kuangtu suddenly said coldly, "Everything you have should have belonged to me. You should have thought of this day when you took something you shouldn't have." Li Tianlan took a deep look at Li Kuangtu. His voice was a little tired. "I can give you one last chance to dissolve the purgatory of heaven capital and stand by my side. Everything that happened today can be regarded as if nothing happened. The conflict between us doesn't have to be a life and death fight." Li Kuangtu twitched the corner of his mouth. The smile on the corner of his mouth was getting bigger and bigger. At the same time, his aura was also rising, and he became arrogant and crazy. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. Li Kuangtu looked straight at Li Tianlan. He said his answer word by word, "There is only one of us." Li Tianlan's calm eyes became cold little by little. The exquisite sword formation that was revolving around him suddenly stopped. Li Tianlan's voice sounded in the forest. "My answer to you, boom!" The sword formation of the 13-story building suddenly shook. The forest within a radius of hundreds of meters was completely shattered by the infinite sword energy in an instant. Li Tianlan's figure appeared in front of Li Kuangtu, and the sword energy soared into the sky. "I'm very disappointed." Chapter 1165. The raging sword energy hovered wildly. In an instant, a shining sword edge appeared in front of Li Kuangtu. It was not Li Tianlan. It was the sword edge. In everyone's perception, Li Tianlan's body and the sword formation all disappeared. He seemed to have become a magic weapon shining with cold light, appearing in Li Kuangtu's chest with extreme indifference and anger. The moment the sword edge pierced Li Kuangtu's clothes, his fingers moved slightly and completed the handprint in the shortest time possible. Infinite collection. The dazzling light burst out in an instant. The sword energy entangled with the sword energy and exploded. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his eyebrows, and the sword formation of the 13 stories tower rotated rapidly. The startling sword enlarged rapidly in his hand and moved straight forward. Large swaths of sword light kept flying around Li Kuangtu. The Infinite Collection, which was supposed to be both offensive and defensive, completely became a defensive unique skill in Li Kuangtu's hands. The surging sword energy formed a dense space of sword energy in front of him. A large number of sword energy squeezed together and instantly formed an extremely sharp shield, completely enveloping Li Kuangtu inside. The sword edge of the startling sword stopped for a moment at the edge of the shield. The next second, the whole shield suddenly broke, and Li Tianlan took a step closer to Li Kuangtu again. The startling sword that was about to pierce Li Kuangtu's chest suddenly retracted and became a part of the sword formation again. Li Tianlan took a step forward, and the endless sword energy boiled in front of him. The huge impact directly blew Li Kuangtu's figure away. The forest ruins were filled with surging sword lights, whistling fiercely in the direction where Li Kuangtu had flown out. They tore the space and tore the tree trunks. The falling leaves and the constantly flying sword chi danced chaotically and violently at the same time. Li Kuangtu's figure retreated hundreds of meters in the air before he barely stopped. The fierce flying sword energy came to his face like a tide. Li Kuangtu subconsciously crossed his hands in front of him. Seal. The fierce aura rose, and all the matter around Li Kuangtu suddenly rose into the air and gathered wildly in front of him, turning into a vortex. The surging sword chi shot straight through the air, and a large amount of matter was torn apart before it could even get close to Li Kuangtu. For a moment, countless sword lights rushed into the vortex at the same time. Without any delay or stalemate, the vast ocean seal was directly shattered, and the whirlpool that seemed to be able to absorb everything was torn into smoke and dust all over the sky. The torrent of sword chi, which didn't seem to have weakened at all hit Li Kuangtu. Blood splattered everywhere. Strong arms, strong abdomen, face and legs. Blood splashed all over Li Kuangtu's body, but he still maintained a defensive posture with his hands crossed. He was pushed back another 100 meters by the surging sword chi. "This sword is for Grandpa." Li Tianlan's voice was calm and majestic. He stood there quietly, but the invincible aura on his body continued to rise, bringing with it an irresistible force. "Do you know your mistake?" Li Kuangtu gritted his teeth. The expression in his eyes was extremely complicated. There was a trace of shock, a trace of inexplicable fear, and some indescribable jealousy. The corner of his mouth twitched, but he didn't say anything for a moment. The fight only lasted for a moment. But the strength of Li Tianlan's sword chi was simply incredible. In his perception, the strength of such sword chi had even surpassed that of Wang Tianzong when he was in Mormons. He had fought with Wang Tianzong at that time, so he was very sure how strong Li Tianlan's sword chi was now. In front of Li Tianlan's sword chi, all his defenses were as fragile as a piece of thin paper, vulnerable to a single blow and broken at the first touch. In his current state, there was almost no room for resistance under such sword chi. How was this possible? The sword chi rose, and Li Tianlan took another step forward. Whoosh! Within a distance of less than 1 meter in front of him, the calm space suddenly twisted. The twisted space was quickly dyed by a touch of darkness, and in the blink of an eye, it became an extremely distorted domain. The domain began to expand outward. At the moment when the domain was about to explode, Li Tianlan waved his hand. The sword light was endless. In the extremely dazzling light, the domain that had completely exploded was directly suppressed by the sword light. Li Tianlan continued to move forward. The world suddenly became dark. Gu Xingyun's domain was completely suppressed, and Jiang Shangyu's dark domain followed closely and enveloped Li Tianlan. The surrounding forest and the opponents around him all disappeared. The darkness domain continued to gather, turning into weapons after weapons, cannons after cannons. Within the domain, countless attacks took form without any preparation. The 13-story building rotated around Li Tianlan, and the sword chi flowed. The 13-story building suddenly shook. Countless ice blade turrets in the domain were all shattered, and the endless darkness in all directions was completely illuminated by the sword light. The darkness shattered, and the domain that was condensed to the extreme completely exploded. Li Tianlan took the second step. Jiang Shangyu's domain, which was constantly exploding, swept past him with one majestic airflow after another. Li Tianlan's figure passed through the airflow of the explosion, unscathed and as steady as a rock. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun, with extremely serious eyes, appeared together beside Li Guangtu. The three of them stood side by side, as if facing a formidable enemy. How could it be? The corner of Gu Xingyun's mouth moved, and he couldn't help muttering to himself. Li Guangtu wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. What Gu Xingyun said was exactly what he wanted to say. He could be sure that Li Tianlan's current state was already incredibly strong, even a little stronger than Wang Tianzong in Mormons. What did this mean? In terms of the real realm, Li Tianlan was not even at the peak of the invincible realm. Don't be too nervous. Jiang Shangyu suddenly smiled. He is in a special state now, but in fact, he is not as strong as you think. At least he has not broken through to that supreme level. Jiang Shangyu knew better than anyone what the supreme level in the real environment meant. Although the realm of Miracle City was correct to a certain extent, it was far from authoritative in some aspects. Living in the world, the most important indicator to measure combat power was authority, and only authority. Qi controlling, ice condensing, fire flaming, and thunder shocking. The so-called four realms of martial arts were just substitutions of authority that the founders did not realize, and they only started from the aspect of martial arts. Therefore, in the starry sky, such a realm division was extremely ridiculous, and it was also full of loopholes. Tribulation of Sai City could kill an invincible realm expert in the Qi-controlling realm. Phoenix of the Wang family of Beihai could fight against an invincible realm expert with the strength of the ice-condensing mirror. Fireman of the Li family had also slaughtered a top expert of the half-step invincible realm with the strength of the fire-flaming realm. Azure Dragon Gongsun Qi of Zhongzhou State, known as the first expert under the invincible realm, also seriously injured an invincible realm expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. As for Li Tianlan's brilliant record before entering the invincible realm, there was no need to say more. These were all problems that the concept of the four realms of martial arts could not explain. But the concept of supreme was completely different. Supreme, this was not a realm. But if he had to name this realm, the only name that Jiang Shangyu could think of was Supreme Realm. This was the extreme in the real environment, and it was no longer limited to martial arts. This realm could be touched in all directions. At least now, besides martial arts, Jiang Shangyu knew that there were two people who had reached this realm in other fields. One was the old man in charge of the Holy Land. The other was Qin Weibai. The real Qin Weibai. Both of them had reached the transcendent realm in the spiritual field. In the spiritual field, reaching this step was already supreme. This field was the upper limit of the real environment. In other words, this level was the level where one could really touch the authority directly. There were several real places in the neutral camp, and it was rare for people to reach this level in the real environment. In Jiang Shangyu's memory, every noble in the most powerful force of the neutral camp, the corridor of time and space, had reached this step. It sounded like a lot, but when combined with hundreds of trillions of people and countless races, the number of nobles and nobles, which seemed to be a lot, was actually quite pitiful. And they were not the first people to enter the limit of the real environment in their own time. In this era, the first person to enter this level was undoubtedly Wang Tianzong. But Wang Tianzong, who had reached this level, no matter his age or physical condition, showed that he had insufficient potential. Excluding Wang Tianzong, there was no doubt that Li Tianlan was the most promising one to be the first to enter this level and stand at the peak of this supreme level. If Li Tianlan could really reach this step, he would inadvertently affect the rules of martial arts in the real environment. In this way, it would be relatively easier for others to break through. A considerable part of the nobles and nobles in the corridor of time and space belonged to this situation. They all followed the chosen one of their generation to break through and then grew to this point. Such examples had actually begun to appear now. For example, Qin Weibai's breakthrough in the spiritual field had already, intentionally or unintentionally, driven the current progress of Qin Weibai and Gu Xianyan in the spiritual field. And the first person to break through the shackles and successfully go to the limit of the real environment, whether returnees or newcomers, would be highly valued by the whole camp. Such a person had the real potential to be conferred the title of king and go to the peak of authority. And those who broke through a little later but also entered this level would also be valued. Those who could stand at this level, no matter who did it first, at least showed their great potential. As long as they did not die halfway, they would at least be at the level of Marquis in the end. And the first person to enter this level and go to the peak, if he was lucky enough or had great potential, could break the suppression of the real environment to a certain extent at the peak and put half of his foot out of the real environment. And then from touching authority to controlling authority. Reaching this level in martial arts was what Jiang Shangyu once said and Li Tianlan had just done. That was the limit state of the Chosen One, the law of Sword Tao. Chapter 1166. Jiang Shangyu was well aware of what was going on with those Sword Tao laws. He was Jiang Shangyu, but he could also be regarded as an unknown who was in a weak state but retained part of his memory. This strange state allowed him to ignore the suppression of the real environment in his base to a certain extent and improve his combat effectiveness. It was also because of this that he suppressed Ruthless. And now Li Tianlan's state, to some extent, could be regarded as the counterattack of the real environment. Real and illusory were two completely opposite environments. In the real world, there should be no absolute chaos, and there should be no absolute order. So when chaos and order appeared in the real environment would definitely change. This was the most basic rule. So within the scope permitted by the rule, the real environment could easily integrate with the real individual. In the whole Miracle City, Li Tianlan was the most real individual. So Li Tianlan could ignore the suppression of the environment with the help of his divine form and come to Tianan from Yuzhou. So Li Tianlan's strength soared and he could even use the sword laws. He ignored the real environment, because at this moment he was the real environment. And now, with the disappearance of the shadow and order, the real environment would become stable again. This also meant that Li Tianlan's state would slowly decline to his real level. Li Tianlan would still be unparalleled in that way. But at least it would not be as desperate as it was now. The most important thing was that Li Tianlan would not know this. Your Majesty East Emperor is really powerful. But the final battle in Beihai is over. Your Majesty came all the way here to fight us. Are you going to continue to show your power? Jiang Shangyu suddenly smiled and began to talk nonsense. He could not see Li Tianlan's attributes after the order transformation, but he could roughly feel the strength of his energy. At this time, Li Tianlan's energy strength was strong and magnificent, like a star, which people could not look directly at. But this intensity was decreasing with every passing second. At most 5 minutes, Li Tianlan would return to his normal state. At that time, it would be their time to make a move. Jiang Shangyu stared at Li Tianlan closely. His smile was light and breezy, but the killing intent in his eyes was constantly flashing. The speed of Li Tianlan's appearance disrupted his plan, but it also let him see another possibility. In his normal state, Li Tianlan could be called invincible. But this kind of invincibility did not make people lose the courage to resist. Gu Xingyun had successfully broken through. In other words, among the 3 of them, 2 of them had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm and were at the same level as Li Tianlan. The other one was also at the top of the peak of the invincible realm, and his physical quality had also surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. If the 3 of them really joined hands, coupled with the hundreds of villagers in the base, it would be impossible for them to survive. All these forces together might be able to keep Li Tianlan here. The most important thing now was to wait for Li Tianlan's condition to return. Li Tianlan also smiled. His eyes were as sharp as a knife. He paused beside Gu Xingyun and then fell on Li Guangtu. I really didn't expect the 3 of you to stand together. How arrogant was Li Guangtu? At this time, he actually cooperated with Gu Xingyun. Not to mention Li Tianlan, perhaps all the people who knew Li Guangtu couldn't think of it. Is it enough to kill you? Gu Xingyun gently raised the corners of his mouth, and his eyes were full of resentment and insolence. Before Li Tianlan could speak, Jiang Shangyu had already said with a chuckle, "It's improper to fight and kill. We have no conflict of interest with His Majesty East Emperor now, and there is no need to fight to the death. Your Highness is the war god of Zhongzhou State, and His Majesty is the future guardian of Zhongzhou State. You two should help each other. This situation must be what Zhongzhou State wants to see." His voice paused slightly, and he looked at Li Tianlan with a smile. "Your Majesty, what do you think?" There was no doubt that this was a reminder or a warning to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan could attack Li Guangtu and Jiang Shangyu, but Gu Xingyun had an official identity. As the current state-protecting war god of Zhongzhou State, if Gu Xingyun died in the hands of Li Tianlan, it would definitely cause a stir. Chen Fangqing's death put Li Tianlan in a difficult situation without evidence. Li Tianlan killed Gu Xingyun. Once the evidence was conclusive, the situation of Emperor Dong's palace would undoubtedly be more miserable. Jiang Shangyu wanted to delay time, and he also wanted Li Tianlan to have concerns. Once he had concerns, he would think carefully. Once he began to think, his will would be scattered. In this way, the speed of his condition's decline would become faster and faster. Li Tianlan quietly looked at Jiang Shangyu and was silent for about 2 seconds. "Are you done?" he asked casually. Jiang Shangyu's pupils suddenly contracted. Li Tianlan didn't like nonsense. Not only he knew, but the whole dark world knew. So before the voice of this rhetorical question fell, the endless sword light had suddenly burst out. The sword rain covered the world. Li Tianlan's figure rushed forward. The sword formation of the 13-story building completely disappeared around him. Li Tianlan was barehanded. Like a flash of lightning, he suddenly appeared in front of Jiang Shangyu with a long series of residual shadows. Boom, 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 da-boom. Several domains released by Jiang Shangyu with a wave of his hand were almost completely shattered at the same time. Li Tianlan's figure tore the domains and rushed over without any pause. The sword energy was boiling, the storm was fierce, and the thunder was powerful. At this moment, not only Gu Xingyun, but even Jiang Shangyu felt a little suffocated. This was an unimaginable impact and sense of oppression, with endless power and strong aggressiveness, as if it was crushing their souls in all directions. Strong anger and indifference rushed over. Jiang Shangyu suddenly raised his arm. In an instant, the space in front of him folded layer by layer and became extremely dark and gloomy. One after another, small distorted domains spread out in front of him. Li Tianlan rushed straight to him. The domains were instantly shattered. He punched. The two men's fists collided with each other. Jiang Shangyu's body was directly hit out like a cannonball. His body had just left the ground. In the flying blood, Gu Xingyun's body had been smashed away at a faster speed than Jiang Shangyu. Countless different sword lights rushed directly to Li Tianlan in Gu Xingyun's flying blood. Li Guangtu completed the handprint. Ninth sky and infinity. The sharp sword light surged out. One after another, the sword energy shone brightly. 9 heavens wind and thunder sword. Heavenly flying fairy sword. Heaven-breaking rainbow sword. Peerless myriad Dao sword. Jifeng sword raining technique. Nirvana sword. Yin and Yang sword. Great void sword. Phantom sword. The sword energy was dense. Countless sword lights converged on Li Guangtu at the same time. This was Li Guangtu's first real all-out attack after the Battle of Mormons, and the degree of his desperation even surpassed that of the Battle of Beihai. Li Guangtu's eyes were calm and determined. It was an incomprehensible and indescribable paranoia. Li Tianlan. At the very beginning, in Li Guangtu's heart, the name was completely a joke. Li Honghe tried his best to cultivate him. The giant group spared no effort to support him. All of this was meaningless in Li Guangtu's eyes. He looked down on Li Tianlan. In his view, Li Tianlan, the nominal heir of the Li family, was just a puppet on the surface. What could he inherit from the Li family? During the Li family's decline for more than 20 years, the loyal core members who had followed the Li family were transferred every year. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital accepted most of the elites who were truly loyal to the Li family. Some of the secret resources left by the Li family were also absorbed by the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Purgatory of Heaven capital stayed dormant in East Island and slowly grew stronger. What did Li Tianlan inherit from the Li family? The glory of the past? The heavy responsibility? Was that a tragic graveyard? The hostility of the Wang family of Beihai? The suppression of Kunlun City? It seemed that was all. For Li Guangtu, who really held the core of the Li family in his hands, how could he take a fancy to this so-called heir of the Li family? Li Guangtu never thought about letting Li Tianlan inherit the Li family. He thought Li Tianlan didn't deserve it. Only he was the real master of the Li family and could lead the Li family to the real peak. Li Tianlan would grow. Li Guangtu didn't mind giving him some help at first. Because with Li Tianlan's continuous growth, he could attract the hatred of Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai to the greatest extent with the remaining elites of the Li family. In this way, as the real Li family, the Purgatory of Heaven capital could come out at the most critical time, give the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City the heaviest blow, and rise again. At that time, Li Guangtu was confident that he could kill Li Tianlan, who had grown to a certain extent but not to the peak. He was just a target to attract attention. What could he do? But there were too many accidents. For more than 20 years, Li Honghe, who had a very bad relationship with him, gradually handed over the elites of the Li family to the Purgatory of Heaven capital for the sake of the Li family, but he did not agree with Li Guangtu's plan at all. The relationship between the father and son was getting worse and worse. When Li Honghe really made up his mind to train Li Tianlan as the real successor of the Li family, he gave Li Guangtu a heavy blow first. In the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the Heavenly Parish Hall was out of control. Everyone knew that the Purgatory of Heaven capital had Sunluo Hall, Life-Prolonging Hall, and Athanasi Hall, which were also the three parts of Heaven capital that the Dark World knew. In fact, in addition to Sunluo Hall, Life-Prolonging Hall, and Athanasi Hall, there were two other important core components in the Purgatory of Heaven capital: Heavenly Parish Hall and Heaven Azura Hall. The Heaven Luo Palace was in charge of intelligence. The Li family's case of treason broke out too abruptly, and the senior management dealt with it very decisively. Li Honghe's concession was very firm, which also left some hidden dangers that the senior management and the Li family were well aware of but no one could expose. Li Honghe had controlled the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State for many years, and his layout was not limited to Zhongzhou State. After the case of treason, the Li family's forces in Zhongzhou State were almost uprooted. Li Honghe retreated to the border with thousands of elites, but the Li family's overseas layout for many years was almost unscathed. It was not exactly unscathed. The Wang family of Beihai provided a lot of information and took the opportunity to absorb a lot of overseas forces belonging to the Li family. But overall, the Li family's overseas layout, various intelligence teams, countless secret lines, and various high-level spies that penetrated into various departments were retained at least 60%. This part of the power began to gather together with the rise of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Li family's elites constantly escaped from Zhongzhou State and entered the Purgatory of Heaven capital by faking their deaths, and finally almost completely restored the Li family's overseas power network. And this part of the power, it was the Heaven Luo Palace of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. It was mainly responsible for intelligence collection, financial expenditure, searching for resources, various investments, and so on. The core agency hidden in the dark like the Heaven Luo Palace was the Heaven Fall Hall. It could be said to be the core agency of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and also the strongest hidden sword of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Heaven Fall Hall was responsible for assassination, surprise attack, beheading, and attacking. The existence of the Heaven Fall Hall could be said to be the strongest combat force in the Purgatory of Heaven capital, except for Li Guangtu himself, and it could be competent for all tasks. Because it was an agency with an invincible realm expert and the strongest assassin. The Heaven Fall Hall was the hidden sword of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, but it also had a name that everyone in the Dark World knew. Sai City, Zhongzhou State. From the day Li Honghe made up his mind to let Li Tianlan inherit the Li family, the Heaven Fall Hall went out of control. This was something that even Li Guangtu did not expect. No one could have imagined that Li Honghe had such a deep influence on Sai City. Sai City stood directly beside Li Tianlan. This was the beginning of Li Guangtu's mental imbalance. Then everything began to go out of control. The Samsara Palace set off the final battle of Heaven Capital. Qin Weibai found the purgatory of Heaven Capital hidden in East Island. At that time, the alliance between the two sides was cooperation, but also a threat. Before Li Guangtu made up his mind, Qin Weibai almost forced the purgatory of Heaven Capital to come out and get involved in the chaos. The air that Li Guangtu had carefully cultivated died inexplicably without any warning. The purgatory of Heaven Capital appeared in a high-profile manner at the most critical moment of the final battle. Li Guangtu and Wang Tianzong fought to a draw. Then a series of things gradually went out of control. The purgatory of Heaven Capital got East Island. Although it was an unexpected result, Li Guangtu was very satisfied with the result. But then there were several years of chaos in the Dark World. The purgatory of Heaven Capital was already in the game and could not stay out of it. So not only the purgatory of Heaven Capital, but the situation in the entire Dark World began to go out of control. All the superpowers were fighting, and the contradictions kept escalating. With the destruction of the Mechfield Alliance, all the conflicts were quietly controlled by that woman and concentrated in the Snow Country. The Dark World fell apart. The superiors of the divine and holy lists died one after another, and the power structure completely collapsed. No one could have thought that the chaos in Snow Country would come to this point. But when it happened, it was already out of control. Wang Tianzong's breakthrough was more like a fuse, completely detonating the last madness of that era. The Polar Ground Alliance, the Jiang family of South America, the Men in Black, Rothschild, the Shadow Throne, the Holy Land, the Fantasy World, the Knights Templars, the Heroes Club, the Wang family of Beihai, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Kunlun City. All the superpowers, including the Samsara Palace, fell from the throne and had not recovered yet. The eternal sword light shone above Mormons, completely burying everything in that era. All the superiors of that era were either dead or injured. So, at the dawn of the new era, Li Tianlan and Dong Huang rose rapidly and grew stronger. Li Tianlan made rapid progress. The strength of Emperor Dong's palace also developed rapidly. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital kept a low profile because of Li Guangtu's injury. It even withdrew from East Island and curled up in Tiannan. With the rise of Emperor Dong's palace, the voices inside the Purgatory of Heaven Capital became more and more discordant. Li Honghe did not leave much for Li Tianlan, but it was by no means little. Jiangxia Province was originally the base of the return of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in Li Guangtu's plan. Now it was in Li Tianlan's hands. Sai City, the sharpest sword of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, was now in Li Tianlan's hands. Qingye, Fireman, Eagle King, and some other real elders and core elites of the Li family were now in high positions in Zhongzhou State and were about to become the backbone of the new group. They were all loyal to Li Tianlan. These people supported the most basic framework of Emperor Dong's palace. As Li Tianlan reached the peak, the Flourishing Age Fund merged with Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan absorbed all the power hidden under the water of the Samsara Palace with his fragile foundation. The country that Qin Weibai gave him was quickly stabilized on the foundation of the Li family. So Emperor Dong's palace soared to the sky and was completely above the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Today, the people in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were unstable to a certain extent. All this was because of Li Tianlan. Li Guangtu found that before he came to his senses, the young man, who was a joke in his eyes and he had always looked down on, had already walked ahead of him. Whether it was individual force, overall power, or influence, Li Tianlan had surpassed him. Why? He resented Li Honghe. He resented him for not supporting him to deal with the Wang family of Beihai. He resented him for treating Li Tianlan as the heir of the Li family. He began to resent everything about Li Tianlan. Those should belong to him. The current Emperor Dong's palace should also belong to him. He finally began to regard Li Tianlan as an opponent, But he found that when he looked at him now, he had to look up to him. It was impossible to understand this mentality without personal experience. It was jealousy and unwillingness that could burn everything. Li Tianlan. The name changed from a joke to an unforgettable one in his heart. And just today, just now, this young man, who he had always looked down on, looked at him condescendingly, said that he would give him a chance and ask him if he knew his mistake. Jealousy, anger, unwillingness, resentment. All the emotions completely exploded in Li Guangtu's mind. His whole person became extremely crazy in an instant. Why? Why should he know his mistake? He was right. The extremely strong negative emotions completely swallowed Li Guangtu's reason. At this moment, because Jiang Shangyu was repelled, Gu Xingyun was repelled. Facing the truly invincible Li Tianlan, Li Guangtu's counterattack was resolute, without any concession or compromise. Li Tianlan's figure approached quickly. Pieces of sword light condensed around Li Guangtu one after another. All the defenses were abandoned. The injuries in his body were no longer suppressed. Outbreak. He tried his best, hysterically, and desperately broke out. All the unique skills he had mastered were completely tilted. His potential was burning wildly. Li Guangtu controlled more than 9 kinds of sword energy at the same time in the endless ninth void. All the sword energy from Jade Pool, Mount Shu, and Jifeng Sword Raining School were boiling around him. In the center of the boiling sword energy, Li Guangtu, who was shining all over, also became a sword. A pure sword. The sword light burned on him. So the pure sword also disappeared. Li Guangtu became a pure sword energy. 24 moves of sword. Buzz. In the violent buzz, heaven and earth shook at the same time. The extremely dazzling sharpness burst out in pieces. With Li Guangtu as the center, all the trees and grass within a radius of hundreds of meters were completely torn apart. The ground was shaking wildly, and cracks began to spread one after another. The seemingly chaotic but orderly sword energy was constantly changing and rearranging itself. The wind and clouds were surging inside the forest. With a loud bang, the ground within 100 meters completely collapsed. The underground water surged out, and a lake suddenly appeared inside the forest. The sword light moved between heaven and earth. The sharpness tore up the surging water, and the lake was overturned in an instant. A large amount of water rose into the air, turned into sword energy, and turned into frost. The anger was boiling, and the temperature in the air was extremely high. The fire began to spread in the frost, and the storm roared between the ice and the fire. The space, which had been distorted to the extreme, was constantly rubbing against each other, bursting out a piece of electric arc. The electric arc instantly turned into dense thunderbolts. Li Guangtu's face was pale, but his blood-red eyes were full of extreme madness. A large amount of sword energy, which constantly vibrated and changed its order, enveloped everything. In the sword energy, the storm raged, the frost spread, the fire spread, and the thunderbolts surged. Li Guangtu disappeared completely. A whirlpool of sword energy with a diameter of hundreds of meters appeared directly in the forest. The whirlpool rotated wildly, devouring and tearing everything apart. One after another, the sword energy was constantly surging and condensing crazily. Each sword energy carried several different sword intents. Li Tianlan stopped. He could feel Li Guangtu's anger, his depression, his unwillingness, indignation, dissatisfaction, jealousy, and even despair. Li Guangtu was burning his potential. This could even be said to be a blow that surpassed his peak. So Li Tianlan's advancing figure stopped in place. Countless afterimages formed because of his fast speed completely disappeared. His body faced the huge and magnificent whirlpool of sword energy, which looked extremely real. He just stood quietly with a calm face. This was not fear, nor was it fear. The reason why he stopped was very simple. He didn't think of anything. He was just waiting for Li Guangtu's strongest blow. He was calm and indifferent. In the constantly rotating whirlpool, the anger continued to surge. Li Guangtu was obviously completely irritated by Li Tianlan's calm attitude at this time. The sword energy in the whirlpool was even stronger. The whole huge whirlpool changed its shape in the distortion, stretched and extended in the air, and finally turned into a giant sword hundreds of meters long, completely condensed by sword energy. The sword energy of the 24 moves of sword was the blade. Countless sword energy were the blade. The giant sword crossed between heaven and earth and chopped down wildly at Li Tianlan. Violent, crazy, cruel, and swift. There was mighty sword light everywhere in the forest. The giant sword, like a divine punishment, chopped down from the sky and instantly reached Li Tianlan's head. Li Tianlan raised his head expressionlessly and looked straight at the sword edge. In the almost earth-shattering sword, he calmly raised his palm. Bang! The giant sword across heaven and earth chopped directly into Li Tianlan's palm. To be exact, it chopped on a weak and almost imperceptible sword energy in Li Tianlan's palm. That tiny strand of sword qi, which was as tiny as a strand of hair, forcibly withstood the gigantic sword in the sky. In the next second, the sword light flowing on the giant sword began to dissolve rapidly. The sword energy in Li Tianlan's hand continued to grow at a speed visible to the naked eye. All kinds of sharp but different sword energy hovered wildly in his hand. 9 emptiness and infinity. The same unique skill. Almost in the blink of an eye, there was also a giant sword in Li Tianlan's hand with sword energy crisscrossing. This is Gu Xingyun, who was ready to attack with all his strength, froze on the spot and swallowed subconsciously. Heaven end. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself, the further use of the heaven end's authority. The giant sword in the sky kept trembling, with a shrill buzz, like Li Kuangtu's angry roar. Li Tianlan, who was calm and indifferent, still raised his palm and casually held the hilt. In the blink of an eye, 2 giant swords of the same size, shape, and nature appeared in the forest. Because they were the same 9 emptiness and infinity, they were also controlling the same sword energy. And they were all controlled by Li Kuangtu. At this moment, Li Tianlan actually did nothing. He didn't control different sword energy, and he didn't use the same unique skill as Li Kuangtu. The giant sword of sword energy in his hand was completely controlled by Li Kuangtu. The only thing he did was to copy Li Kuangtu's sword. It was a flawless copy. Such a copy brought Li Kuangtu double the consumption, but the power of the sword energy was based on Li Tianlan's physical state at this time. The sword energy was even stronger than Li Kuangtu's original giant sword of sword energy. The hilt of the giant sword of sword energy was held in Li Tianlan's hand. Li Tianlan's arm shook, and the billowing sword energy swept everything in the forest. The blade of the giant sword had smashed hard on Li Kuangtu's giant sword of sword energy. It was the most direct collision. It was also the most direct crushing. The sword energy collided head-on, and the powerful destructive force directly caused an extremely violent explosion in the air. Thunderbolts, raging fire, ice, and hurricane. Countless sword energy with pure energy raged wildly between heaven and earth. The giant sword of sword energy condensed by Li Kuangtu was smashed by a sword. The blinding sword light began to scatter, and with an incomparably dazzling light, it completely swallowed Li Kuangtu and Li Tianlan. Jiang Shangyu opened his own domain. A darkness completely enveloped him and Gu Xingyun. Li Kuangtu, Li Tianlan. The level of the sword of both sides was almost at the peak of the current dark world. Although Gu Xingyun had broken through, without his protection, he would definitely be injured in the aftermath of such sword energy, although he would not die. The dark domain continued to shrink, covering his and Gu Xingyun's bodies. The next second, the vast sword energy with the vast light formed a misty and tide-like shock wave, destroying all the surrounding matter in an instant. The deep pit torn by the sword energy expanded again and became a big pit with a diameter of nearly 2 kilometers in an instant. Water splashed out of the huge pit, and the sword energy full of destructive power continued to fluctuate. Jiang Shangyu's domain was constantly deformed and twisted, and the whole domain was constantly flying back under the shock wave. Jiang Shangyu expanded his domain to melt the sword energy, but his and Gu Xingyun's bodies were directly forced back nearly a kilometer in the strong shock wave. The forest had completely disappeared. The trees, the grass, and the fallen leaves were all smashed into ashes. The ashes fluttered in the air with the wind. The ground also disappeared. In the area of thousands of meters, there was only a deep pit still surging with water. The shock wave formed by the surging sword energy spread for thousands of meters, and the powerful force gradually disappeared as it continued to spread. But in the battlefield, countless sword energy were still entangled everywhere. The space that had been torn and healed again was twisted in the air, like patches sewn on the transparent air. The gushing blood seeped out of one of the patches and spilled into the lake that had not yet fully formed in the deep pit on the ground. A large amount of sword energy was entangled in that patch. Li Kuangtu's figure fell quickly in the entangled sword energy, and blood flowed. At the moment when he was about to fall into the deep pit, his whole body suddenly stopped and stood in the void. Blood surged from his body. Li Kuangtu's face was pale, and his body kept trembling. He seemed to want to make himself look calm, but his constantly twitching face fully showed the pain he was suffering at this time. He gritted his teeth and stood in the air, and even the most basic suspension was a little difficult. Who? In the sound of heavy breathing, Li Kuangtu slowly raised his head and looked at the mottled space in front of him. In front of him, there was still a space patch where sword energy gathered, constantly fluctuating. He could feel that Li Tianlan was still inside. But his aura had become extremely weak. Li Kuangtu twitched the corner of his mouth, and an extremely ferocious and painful but somewhat satisfied smile gradually appeared on his face. Li Tianlan's figure slowly walked out of that patch. There was still no sword formation. He was still barehanded. Blood was also flowing on Li Tianlan's body. His aura was very weak, but it was extremely calm. Li Kuangtu's smile froze. He raised his head and looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan stood steadily in the air. Bang! A violent heartbeat sounded directly. Li Tianlan's weak aura returned to its peak state in an instant. All the wounds on his body were completely healed. As he moved his body, a biting frost covered him. The pale frost was instantly dyed blood red. The frost absorbed the blood on his body and kept sliding down from his body. Li Tianlan, who had recovered, breathed a sigh of relief and whispered to himself, "Much better." No one knew how powerful his physical recovery and combat endurance were after the formation of the second heart. Even he couldn't believe such an increase. But at the same time, the formation of the second heart also greatly increased the load on his body. The increase in his appetite and his exuberant energy were just trivial matters. Every time the new heart beat extremely slowly, it would form an extremely powerful energy in Li Tianlan's body, which even his current body couldn't bear. When there was no battle, Li Tianlan could only torment Qin Weibai on the bed. But even if he vented dozens or hundreds of times in that way, a single beat of his new heart was enough to make his efforts completely go to waste. More and more energy was stored in his body, more and more. A large amount of energy continued to flow to a certain extent and began to strengthen his body. This feeling was not good. Li Tianlan even often felt that his body would be completely bursting with energy. He needed to fight. It was a high-quality battle. So he was very satisfied with Li Kuangtu's sword, very satisfied. This sword brought him some injuries, but all the injuries were instantly repaired by the energy in his body, and the continued energy was finally vented a lot from the battle with the injuries. In Li Tianlan's words, this feeling was very comfortable. Li Kuangtu's smile completely froze. His body stood in the air, tottering. At the same time, Jiang Shangyu's eyes also lit up. The domain around him completely disappeared. At this moment he was very sure that Li Tianlan had completely withdrawn from the real state, and his combat capability had returned to normal. Jiang Shangyu took a step forward and stepped out of his domain. His and Gu Xingyun's killing intent and hostility locked on Li Tianlan almost at the same time. Li Tianlan didn't even look at them. He just stared at Li Kuangtu, who was covered in blood and seemed to be about to lose his balance. "This sword is for the Li family." Li Tianlan's voice was calm and indifferent. "Do you know your mistake?" Li Kuangtu's face suddenly twisted and became extremely ferocious. The strong humiliation swallowed his reason, and his body trembled more and more obviously. "Ha ha ha ha! In the violent trembling, Li Kuangtu suddenly laughed wildly. His voice was hoarse and ferocious, with strong resentment. I was wrong. My only mistake was that I didn't kill you as soon as possible, you little bastard. Boom. A round ripple suddenly appeared under Li Tianlan's feet. The incomparably heavy sword energy, like a mountain, directly pressed down on Li Kuangtu. You don't know what's good for you. Go to hell. Li Kuangtu's arm shook and instantly made a seal. The infinite sword energy directly turned into a turbulent power at this moment. From top to bottom, from bottom to top. Two opposite forces rushed to Li Tianlan at the same time, as if they wanted to crush him into a meat pie. The Milky Way seal. The battlefield shook violently. At the moment of another confrontation, Li Kuangtu's eyes suddenly flashed with a bright light. Li Tianlan was indeed still in his peak state. But both the destructive power and the abundance of sword energy were obviously lower than before, returning to Li Kuangtu's normal level of cognition. At the same time, two different kinds of dark domains spread over and enveloped Li Tianlan. The domains kept twisting and tearing Li Tianlan's body crazily. In the darkness, Li Tianlan's body was completely stretched to the limit. The dragon fist flew. Li Tianlan's speed accelerated in an instant. There were many shadows, and he almost stepped to the edge of the domain in one step. He waved his fist. Gu Xingyun's domain was shattered in an instant. The sword light bloomed in front of Li Tianlan, and all the twisted dark power in Jiang Shangyu's domain turned into nothingness under the sword light. Li Kuangtu, who regained his confidence, suppressed his injury. Blood gathered in his hand, and a blood-red long sword took shape in his hand. His figure flashed, and he had appeared directly in front of Li Tianlan. The long sword swept across, and the blood-red sword energy rushed to Li Tianlan like a waning moon. The moment the waning moon lit up, Li Kuangtu's figure had already come behind Li Tianlan. The sword energy was surging. Li Kuangtu's figure was like a ghost, appearing in all directions almost at the same time. The overwhelming sword energy rushed out from all directions, trying to cut Li Tianlan's body. The blood-red sword light was mighty. Gu Xingyun's domain directly enveloped Li Kuangtu and kept compressing around him. The domain was not shrinking. Li Kuangtu's body seemed to be wearing a very close but extremely strong armor. This armor not only defended Li Tianlan, but also Jiang Shangyu. The blood-red sword energy that penetrated through the sky and earth kept bursting out. Jiang Shangyu had risen into the air and raised his hands high. His hands bent little by little as his body rose, as if he was grasping something extremely heavy with great caution. The space suddenly became extremely dull and silent. There was no need to say anything at all. Li Kuangtu's sword light flashed, and his speed suddenly accelerated to the extreme. In an instant, countless Li Kuangtu appeared in countless directions around Li Tianlan. One after another, blood-red sword light condensed wildly and shot toward Li Tianlan's body. Jiang Shangyu's body stiffened for a moment. His bent palms seemed to have finally grasped something, and his knuckles became stiff. Jiang Shangyu laughed. The dark domain opened up around him in an instant. Jiang Shangyu's hands suddenly pulled down. The sky above the battlefield was suddenly filled with a deafening roar of thunder. Jiang Shangyu seemed to tear a piece of the sky directly. As his hands fell down, the surging thunder fell with a loud bang. Hundreds of meters, thousands of meters, thousands of meters. The violent thunder light kept flying in the air, sweeping every inch of the surrounding space. In a scene like the end of the world, the thunder all over the sky attacked everything indiscriminately. Gu Xingyun was also attacking. But he was attacking Li Kuangtu. The majestic power fell directly on Li Kuangtu along with his attack. To be exact, it fell on the domain armor he created for Li Kuangtu. The blood-red sword light was still flying between heaven and earth. In the sharp tearing sound, a sharp light that looked like a domain or a sword formation suddenly appeared around Li Kuangtu. The unique technique of Kunlun City, 9th Secluded Impasse. This was the further deepening use of the unique technique of Kunlun City after Gu Xingyun broke through to the peak of the invincible realm. He covered Li Kuangtu's body with his domain to form armor, providing the most basic defense strength and preventing Li Kuangtu from being accidentally hurt by the thunder all over the sky. At the same time, this domain armor was also, in a sense, Gu Xingyun's clone. Gu Xingyun already had the ability to remotely control the clone to fight directly. Among the people present, Gu Xingyun's strength was undoubtedly the lowest, and he was the easiest to die. He was also the one that Li Tianlan couldn't kill the most. As the war god of Zhongzhou state, no matter how lawless Li Tianlan was, he couldn't directly kill Gu Xingyun in this situation. He could be said to be the safest. But this so-called safety only meant that Gu Xingyun wouldn't die. He had such a troublesome identity. If there was a chance, Li Tianlan would definitely give him a hard time and let him leave the battlefield with serious injuries in an instant. Therefore, Gu Xingyun did not get close to Li Kuangtu at all. He wandered far away at the edge, turning his domain avatar into armor and merging with Li Kuangtu. In this case, it was equivalent to him fighting side by side with Li Kuangtu. The sword energy in the 9th secluded impasse was dense. This could be said to be a domain composed of sword energy, or a sword formation composed of domains. The cold sharpness burst out with the blood-red sword light. In the next second, the thunder all over the skies suddenly fell on the battlefield. The lightning fell on Li Kuangtu's domain armor. The domain armor suddenly burst out with a dark light. The sharpness of the 9th secluded impasse directly increased and began to change completely. 10th unique domain. The most powerful unique technique of Kunlun City directly enveloped Li Tianlan. In the next second, the blood-red sword light and the vast thunder poured into the 10th unique domain at the same time. The 10th unique domain suddenly shrank. The lightning, the sword energy, the domain, and everything burst out with Li Tianlan as the center when they were squeezed to the extreme. Collapse, expansion, tearing, twisting, explosion, entanglement. Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, Gu Xingyun. Two experts who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. A top expert at the peak of the invincible realm. The energy reaction caused by the three people's complete cooperation made the whole battlefield extremely chaotic. No one could see where Li Tianlan was. There were only constantly twisting lights and shadows on the battlefield. The extremely strong destructive power and lethality kept surging in the air. The space was broken, and it had become an extremely pure dark void. There seemed to be endless light surging out of the void. They couldn't see anything. They couldn't feel anything. The only thing they could hear, it was a violent heartbeat with absolute vitality and vitality. Bang! The heartbeat was so strong that the sudden surging sound wave tore up all the lights and shadows in an instant. The surging power was completely suppressed in an instant. The mighty but invisible sword energy suddenly burst out in the center of the light and shadow. There was no light. There was only the surging sharpness between heaven and earth. The sharpness penetrated the space, and the transparent air was constantly folded at a speed visible to the naked eye. The feeling at this moment was simply indescribable. In the perception of Jiang Shangyu and the others, as the space was constantly folded in the sharpness, they were getting closer and closer to Li Tianlan, while Li Tianlan was getting farther and farther away from them. It was a very clear and real contradiction. The sharpness was vast and mighty in every corner that could be perceived. The space folded one layer, the second layer, the third layer, the infinite folding, the infinite collapse. The whole battlefield became dark in an instant. It was like the arrival of the eternal night. In the eternal darkness, the pure black sword light, like a vast ocean, broke out completely. 24 moves of sword, break of reincarnation. The world seemed to recover its essence in an instant. It was quiet, dead silence. The black sword light was vast and mighty without a sound. It was endless darkness. At the same time, it was like a completely silent ocean. The indescribable grandeur and majesty, with pure destructive power, spread from all directions through the constantly folded space. Jiang Shangyu's expression changed dramatically. This sword intent. He was the unknown of the shadow camp. He was the unknown of the shadow camp. This kind of sword intent was completely strange to him. He had never experienced the era of the rise of the god of war and the human emperor, but it did not mean that he could not see the ultimate direction represented by this sword light. Li Tianlan was far from being able to exert the power of the breaking of reincarnation, but he had vaguely touched a trace of the essence of this sword. The ultimate direction of this sword was, there was no time to think. Jiang Shangyu suddenly waved his hand. One after another, domains appeared in front of the ocean of eternal darkness. Countless domains began to condense crazily. There was no intention of attacking at all. Defense. Jiang Shangyu was desperately defending. The dark and deathly still ocean surged over. It looked slow, but it seemed to be extremely fast. In an instant, one domain after another began to shatter soundlessly. Li Kuangtu, whose face was pale, instantly made a seal. All the defensive means in the immortality seal followed Jiang Shangyu's domain and formed several consecutive defensive sword formations. The moment the sword formations appeared, they were completely shattered. The indescribable silent darkness spread with an unstoppable determination. It tore everything apart, shattered everything, and destroyed everything. It was truly invincible and unbreakable. Any matter in front of it was shattered. Sword light, domain, and all the defense and offense did not cause any reaction from the darkness. It was just pure destruction and destruction. Wherever the darkness passed, all their struggles and efforts turned into nothingness without any stagnation. Jiang Shangyu's face was pale. He suddenly gritted his teeth and roared, "Retreat into the village!" The three of them retreated quickly. The darkness accelerated as they retreated. It spread with great determination, covering the whole battlefield, and then the forest on the edge of the battlefield. A large area of the forest silently turned into powder in the mighty sharpness. The sword light tore up all the lawns and ground outside the village. After Jiang Shangyu and the other two entered the village, the whole village suddenly burst into an illusory light. The illusory light was instantly shattered by the dark sword energy. The shield of the whole village was broken without any hesitation. The sun, hanging over the village, emitted extremely cold sunlight at the same time. The sunlight was melted by the darkness. The sun was covered by the darkness at the same time. This was really covering the sky and the sun. When the last ray of sunlight dissolved in the darkness, the sun hidden in the darkness completely burst out, with an extremely cold flowing fire. The dazzling light stirred wildly, entangling with the dark sword light. The darkness and the sun exploded at the same time. There was an earth-shattering noise in the silent world. The sun began to explode. The whole village was completely torn apart by the sharpness. The sword light was surging, and the huge impact swept Jiang Shangyu and the other two from the end of the village to the end. Li Kuangtu looked dispirited. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun stood there straight. Their bodies were stiff, and they looked at it expressionlessly. Crack, countless fine sounds rang out in Gu Xingyun's body. A large mouthful of blood sprayed directly from Jiang Shangyu's mouth. He suddenly knelt on one knee on the ground, breathing rapidly, and his eyes were confused and shocked. The darkness that swept the whole village disappeared. Countless villagers appeared on the street and stood in front of Jiang Shangyu and the other two, who were exhausted on the ground. Everyone looked ahead expressionlessly. Everyone's expression and eyes were the same. Tap, light footsteps could be heard. The space shook slightly. Li Tianlan, with a calm expression, seemed to have stepped into reality from nothingness. His aura was still as strong as ever, and his entire body was clean, without a single scar on it. Hundreds of strange villagers blocked his way. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth, and his eyes fell directly on Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu in the back. "Ants," Li Tianlan said calmly and blandly. Chapter 1167. The faces of Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, and Gu Xingyun twisted at the same time. Jiang Shangyu slowly raised his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He gritted his teeth and said in a hoarse voice, "Do you really think you are invincible in the world?" "I am invincible in the world," Li Tianlan said lightly. Li Kuangtu gritted his teeth, and the corner of his mouth was bleeding. The greatest humiliation in the world might be to tell the truth. Jiang Shangyu's eyes were in a trance for a moment, and he didn't speak for a while. Li Tianlan just stood there quietly, calm and collected. His breath was steady, without a sharp edge or an invincible aura. But his figure was constantly merging with the figure in Jiang Shangyu's memory, and eventually, they were inseparable. It was an indescribable quiet temperament, an indescribable calmness, and an incomprehensible calmness. Indifferent, quiet, and peaceful. His heart was as still as water, and he was invincible in the world. The figure in his memory gradually became clear, and it was inseparable from Li Tianlan. That was the figure that occupied all the lights of an era. That was the figure that could overturn the entire dark world by himself. That was the figure that made countless masters in the world silent. That was the figure that made his father dig out his heart in order to protect the Jiang family. Invincible, cold, brutal, and irresistible, Dongqing Huangtu's figure. Dongqing Huangtu Li Tianlan. Two identical shadows seemed to begin to merge in Jiang Shangyu's memory for the first time. Jiang Shangyu slowly stood up. Fresh blood was still flowing from his body, and the dark red and shocking liquid was silently stained with wisps of dark color. "It's not over yet," Jiang Shangyu said flatly. "Is this idiot crazy?" As Li Tianlan merged with the real environment, the chaotic rules of the twisted jungle completely dissipated. On the virtual screen, the original dark and messy light and shadow finally showed one picture after another. Xinyuan Wushang and Lin Shi were sitting together. Behind them were Xing Tian, saint and apostle. The virtual screen stood in the air, extremely clear, and looked like a three-dimensional 4D movie. "Isn't it over long ago?" Xinyuan Wushang's voice continued. "What else can he fight for?" "It's probably his current base." Lin Shi held his chin with one hand and said casually, "Then, the souls of these villagers are in a distorted state. This is also one of Jiang Shangyu's trump cards." Xinyuan Wushang was silent for a moment, then said calmly, "That's not a bad thing." Lin Shi smiled. "Maybe Jiang Shangyu thinks so too." The current situation was an opportunity for Li Tianlan. Wasn't it also an opportunity for Jiang Shangyu? If they could kill each other today, then no matter who it was, there would be countless troubles and disputes in the future. Compared with that prospect, it was understandable for Jiang Shangyu to give up the base to have a taste. It's just that his chances of winning are negligible. Xinyuan Wushang shook his head and waved his hand. The scene on the screen began to replay. The layers of folded space and the darkness that resembled an eternal night once again appeared on the screen. Lin Shi watched quietly. Xinyuan Wushang was also watching quietly. "Broken reincarnation," Xinyuan Wushang whispered to himself. His Majesty has already grasped the essence of breaking reincarnation. Lin Shi's voice was very calm. As the pinnacle of martial arts in the realm of war gods, breaking reincarnation was truly famous in the starry sky. Among the people present, only Lin Shi, the son of the god of war, was qualified to comment on it. "No wonder," Xinyuan Wushang smiled gently. "I once heard from my father that the god of war was the most promising person to approach his realm in the shortest time. He refused to touch any other authority. Until now, I really understand." As the sharpest peak figure of the human clan, breaking reincarnation had appeared more than once in the starry sky. But how powerful was the god of war? The sword light of breaking reincarnation in his hand could be said to be truly endless. It could easily cover an entire galaxy. The energy reaction that broke through the limit could not be analyzed at all. But the breaking reincarnation in Li Tianlan's hand was extremely clear. He didn't return. This move of breaking reincarnation in the real environment made them vaguely aware of the direction that the god of war was pursuing. So what His Majesty the God of War is doing now is not meaningless, right? Xinyuan Wushang suddenly said. Lin Shi nodded. It's not a secret, at least Great Emperor Xinyuan knows. Xinyuan Wushang was silent. The war had swept across the starry sky. Most people in the corridor of time and space were fighting. But no one was fighting for victory. The human clan could not be a match for the Order Camp or the Dark Shadow. The end and destruction were the inevitable ending. Great Emperor Xianyuan, the human sovereign, the god of war's realm, all the nobles, ministers, ordinary elites, including Xianyuan Wushang and Lin Shi, no one could escape. This was the end that could not be avoided. And in the war before the end, many people just chose to wait. For example, the human sovereign of the imperial palace. For example, the elder princess Feng Qingwu of the corridor of time and space. For example, many people. There was no need for them to take action, because the ending could not be changed. In the whole war, the only one who needed to take action was Great Emperor Xianyuan, and only Great Emperor Xianyuan. He needed enough order substance and dark shadow substance to go to the end of the world before the war ended and end everything with his own hands. But under such circumstances, the god of war was still supporting the corridor of time and space. The black sea of sword energy was sweeping across the star areas. He was fighting this war very seriously. Only now did Xianyuan Wushang understand. The god of war did not end. He gave up on reincarnation and other authorities. He also did not consider what Great Emperor Xianyuan would do after entering the world's end. Because of break reincarnation, the god of war would always be Lin Xianyuan. If it succeeds, Xianyuan Wushang murmured softly, his eyes dazed. If it succeeds, Father will obtain part of the authority of hope. Break reincarnation will become the sword of hope for the human clan. Lin Shi smiled softly. Respectable and fearsome. Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a while before saying softly, Your Majesty, the god of war, is worthy of the title of one of the strongest pillars of the human clan. Unfortunately, break reincarnation only applies to Father and His Majesty Li Tianlan. Lin Shi shook his head regretfully. The other peak figures of the neutral faction still need to touch other authorities. There were many authorities in the starry sky. Martial artists, scholars, calligraphers, even rulers, demons, all of them had different levels of authority. There was only one way for those who had reached the peak of a certain level to touch upon other levels of authority. That was reincarnation. The god of war, Lin Xianyuan, refused reincarnation and focused on the authority of martial arts. Once Li Tianlan returned, he would no longer need reincarnation to touch other authorities. His Majesty Li Tianlan has touched the essence of break reincarnation. Lin Shi smiled and said, I can tell Father. Next, Father will talk to His Majesty Li Tianlan personally. Chapter 1168. If the god of war can succeed, Xianyuan Wushang's eyes were in a trance. He said with some longing, Then after this is over, the situation of the human clan will be much better. Lin Shi was still staring at the virtual screen in front of him. His natural eyes moved slightly, and every detail of the battlefield was imprinted in his eyes. He nodded slightly and then slowly shook his head. The premise is that His Majesty Li Tianlan can return smoothly before this is over. Otherwise, it's meaningless. No matter how strong my father is, he can't do it alone. As he spoke, he took a serious look at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang remained calm and said calmly, There is a great hope. Li Tianlan's return was now the top priority of the cloister of time and space. Although Lin Shi was also here, he was just a bystander. No one outside the cloister of time and space was qualified to interfere with Li Tianlan's return process. This was the obligation and responsibility of the cloister of time and space. No one knew how many plans the cloister of time and space had made for Li Tianlan's return and how many resources it had consumed. No one knew if there was a deviation in those plans. As Li Tianlan's guide, Xianyuan Wushang knew a little, but he couldn't tell Lin Shi these details. If His Majesty can kill Jiang Shangyu today, will it speed up the return process? Lin Shi probed with a calm and collected voice. This question is meaningless. Xianyuan Wushang took a deep breath and said calmly. In their cognition, the energy state of the combination of Wuqing and Worryless was enough to pose an absolutely fatal threat to Jiang Shangyu without alarming the unknown on him. But now the situation was obvious. Lord Wei failed. The reason for the failure was unknown. This was not even a matter of failure. Half of the divine form was temporarily separated from Lord Wei, which alarmed Li Tianlun. The most likely explanation was that Lord Wei was forced to reveal his form of order in the chaotic order. In their cognition, this was almost impossible for Jiang Shangyu to do. But if it was the unknown who did it, the miracle city still existed. No one could understand the reason. The battlefield between Lord Wei and Jiang Shangyu was full of chaotic rules. They didn't dare to alarm the unknown, so they naturally didn't dare to peek. Only after Li Tianlan completely turned the surroundings into a real environment could they see the current situation of the battlefield. No one knew what had happened before except for Jiang Shangyu and Lord Wei. But it was certain that Lord Wei did not kill Jiang Shangyu. So, in Li Tianlan's current state, there was not much hope that he could kill Jiang Shangyu today. Jiang Shangyu's problem needs to be reanalyzed. Xianyuan Wushang's voice was cold. I hope your report will show what the space-time cloister wants to see. I know what to do. Lin Shi shook his head helplessly. It was the war god world and the mortal imperial palace's mistake. Without a doubt, the stronger Jiang Shangyu was in this space-time corridor, the more trouble the war god world and the mortal imperial palace would have to face. If he doesn't die this time, my main goal is to deal with Jiang Shangyu. Lin Shi said. Xianyuan Wushang remained indifferent. The apostle sitting behind Lin Shi suddenly waved his hand. A faint blue electric current shot out from his fingertip and landed on the virtual screen in front of them. The virtual screen shook slightly. In an instant, it seemed to form an independent space parallel to this world. Li Tianlan, Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun, Li Guangdu, the broken battlefield, the collapsed village, and the weird villagers all looked very real on the screen. The faint blue light kept wandering in the space of the screen. All the villagers were connected by the electric light in an instant. The electric light continued to fly. When it approached Li Tianlan, it was reflected back to Jiang Shangyu. Then it was reflected back by Jiang Shangyu. Then it fell on Li Guangdu and Gu Xingyun. The electric light flashed in the apostle's eyes. The voice of the intelligence center sounded in everyone's ears. Do you want to analyze the target and implement order on the target? Saint did not hesitate to confirm the instruction. Another virtual screen lit up in front of them. The weird villagers, Li Guangdu, Gu Xingyun, after all the detectable targets were ordered, the data began to be arranged in front of them one by one. Special energy detected. Target cannot be analyzed. Chaotic energy detected. Target cannot be analyzed. Neutral energy detected. Analysis completed. Dark shadow energy detected. Analysis completed. A lot of data flashed quickly on the virtual screen. Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu could not analyze it. So the data of Li Guangdu and Gu Xingyun became more important reference data in this war. Target identity, Li Guangdu male neutral creature. Authority, martial artist level 3. 9 life strength, low, amplified by the real environment, middle low level, hidden injury state. Life strength is extremely low weak. Combat strength, low, elite level, amplified by the real environment. Real environment internal strength, extremely high, weakness, X, natural enemy, not locked. Combat strength, 31,000, amplified by the real environment, power, 670, amplified by the real environment, agility, 710, amplified by the real environment, physical strength, 2050, amplified by the real environment, spirit, 530, amplified by the real environment, intelligence, 286, amplified by the real environment, exclusive, non-critical hit rate, 5%, amplified by the real environment, critical hit rate increased by 100%, current critical hit rate, 10% speed, 500, amplified by the real environment. Critical hit damage, 30%, amplified by the real environment, authority breakdown, martial artist, sword way characteristics, chase, increase speed by 15%, attack speed by 30%. Thunder, increase critical hit rate by 50% within 10 seconds, increase critical hit damage by 20%. Intermediate penetration, Attack has a 3% chance of ignoring target's defense. Tenacity, life strength recovery speed plus 60%, defense plus 500. Hatred, attack power increase by 80%, attack speed increase by 20%. Amplified by the real environment, all characteristic effects increased by 150%. Unique skill, 24 moves of sword, incomplete. Mastery progress 30%, not mastered 24 moves of sword. Current evaluation, low. 24 moves of sword overall evaluation, peak. Immortal seal, evaluation, mid-level unique skill. Low-level martial arts, folded. Divine weapon, none. Gu Xingyun, male creature, neutral, affected by the shadow rule. Authority, martial artist level 3. 5, affected by the shadow, life strength, low, medium. Unable to lock. Combat strength, 0, medium. Unable to lock. Natural enemy, not locked. Combat strength sad face amplified by the real environment, amplified by the shadow environment. Warning, unknown changes in the target, suppressed by the real environment. Warning, unknown changes in the target, amplified by the shadow environment, suppressed by the real environment. Warning, current combat strength of the target has exceeded the limit. Warning, current combat strength of the target is 0. Warning. Clap. Xianyuan Wushang waved his hand expressionlessly, and the data analysis screen in front of him suddenly disappeared and shattered. What kind of nonsense is this? He reached out his hand and rubbed his forehead. Gu Xingyun has just accepted the shadow rule, but he hasn't completely transformed it, so now there is still a bit of real shadow coexisting with the shadow on him, which can't be analyzed for the time being. When he stabilizes, I will follow up and observe. Saint smiled helplessly. But Li Kuangtu's data is very clear, which is an important reference. In the real environment, Li Kuangtu at his peak should be stronger than Jiang Shangyu at his normal state. Judging from Li Kuangtu's data performance, in this battle, the possibility of His Majesty Li Tianlan killing the three of them is very high. This is just an analysis of combat strength. Xianyuan Wushang glanced at the apostle. Jiang Shangyu's combat strength is low, but it doesn't mean that he has few tricks if Big Brother doesn't succeed in keeping him. Then it's my turn. Lin Shi said calmly. The apostle has temporarily locked on Jiang Shangyu. If he can really escape from His Majesty Li Tianlan, as long as he leaves that base, I will try to kill Jiang Shangyu by force. Chapter 1169. It's not over yet. Jiang Shangyu's voice was so light that it seemed to be a murmur without any emotion. But as his voice sounded, the villagers gathered in the whole village seemed to have received an irresistible order at the same time, and their bodies moved at the same time. In an instant, there was a kind of chaos in the positions of all the villagers, which made people extremely uncomfortable. The villagers' movements were not to attack, but to move a little irregularly. Some people went left, some went right, some went forward, some went back, and some even turned their backs to Li Tianlan. Everyone's movements were not uniform, and the distance they moved was even more chaotic. But as they did not move uniformly, hundreds of villagers suddenly became a strange formation that was too complicated to study. Li Tianlan's brows furrowed tightly. He took a deep look at the villagers who were standing in a chaotic position, and his body slowly rose into the air. The positions of the villagers became clearer when he looked at them from a high place. All kinds of negative emotions began to appear in Li Tianlan's consciousness for no reason. Seeing this formation, Li Tianlan instinctively had an extremely uncomfortable feeling. Li Tianlan's eyes slowly shifted and fell on Jiang Shangyu. He could feel that at the first moment when this strange formation was formed, it seemed that every villager had a vague connection with Jiang Shangyu. Every villager seemed to be no longer an independent individual, but a marionette in Jiang Shangyu's hands. The indescribable strange feeling grew stronger and stronger. Hundreds of villagers began to raise their heads at the same time, staring at Li Tianlan with dull eyes. Men and women, old and young, every villager showed a very strange smile on their faces at the same time. What are these things? Li Tianlan asked faintly. He seemed to have lost the emotion of fear in his consciousness. Absolute confidence made his will indestructible. In this era, no matter where he was, no matter what situation he faced, and no matter what enemy he faced, he firmly believed that he was truly invincible in the world. Jiang Shangyu stared at Li Kuangtu. There was a very strange dark red in his eyes. Do you remember our appointment in Xinyuan City not long ago? Jiang Shangyu's deep voice sounded with a strange tone. Do you remember how you defeated me at that time? Li Tianlan frowned. It had only been less than a month since his duel with Jiang Shangyu. In that duel, he strictly limited a wisp of his sword energy to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. He twisted the sword energy to the extreme and burst out thousands of times in an instant. Unfortunately, he still failed to kill Jiang Shangyu. It's all because of the inspiration you gave me. Jiang Shangyu muttered to himself. His body was also rising slowly, and his smile was getting more and more sinister. You're asking what these things are? Hee, they are my warriors. Jiang Shangyu whispered. It's all me. Jiang Shangyu raised his palm. All the villagers raised their hands at the same time. Boom. Boundless darkness replaced the space in an instant. Domain. Everywhere was a completely boiling domain that was about to explode. Jiang Shangyu's aura rose to the extreme in an instant. The domain exploded from his hands, from the hands of every villager. All of them were domains with the same power. Hundreds of domains surged. How similar was this scene to the duel between the two of them not long ago? But at that time, Li Tianlan limited his sword energy to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and twisted thousands of times in an instant. But at this moment, Jiang Shangyu limited every domain to the invincible realm. Through hundreds of villagers, he released hundreds of domains in an instant. The domains rose and fell, and the darkness swallowed everything. Standing in the center of the darkness, Li Tianlan was completely besieged by hundreds of invincible realm experts at the same time. This was a combat method that maximized combat power without breaking through the real environment. Li Tianlan used it once. Jiang Shangyu learned it without hesitation. Jiang Shangyu kept releasing domains from his hands. His body began to crack in the shortest time, and blood flowed out of his body wildly. Li Tianlan suppressed the sword light to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and could twist thousands of times. Because only by suppressing the sword light to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm could his physical strength at that time barely withstand that kind of extreme outbreak. Here, in the base that Jiang Shangyu had run for many years, his physical strength was stronger than in the real environment, and these villagers were also his trump card. His outbreak this time was equivalent to letting these villagers who had been eroded by the shadow share the physical burden with him. Such a method was almost impossible to replicate, but in his expectation, it was enough to cause a fatal threat to Li Tianlan. Hundreds of invincible realm experts joined forces. Although this kind of power only lasted for a moment, it was enough to destroy the world. Since the emergence of the martial arts realm from the four realms of martial arts to the invincible realm, there might not be hundreds of invincible realm experts in the whole dark world for hundreds of years. What such power meant was self-evident. Hundreds of domains continued to spread and connect. The bright sky on the battlefield was instantly replaced by the extreme night. The domains were completely connected, but they did not form a whole. Instead, they became a curtain of night with hundreds of core points. At the same time, Gu Xingyun and Li Kuangtu all got up, condensed their strongest power into a blow at all costs, and rushed to Li Tianlan. Jiang Shangyu snapped his fingers. Under the curtain of night, the core points of hundreds of domains twisted to the extreme in an instant. Heaven and earth rumbled. It was earth-shattering and earth-shattering. Extreme darkness surged crazily, and all the domains exploded at the same time. The overwhelming destructive power completely drowned Li Tianlan in the blink of an eye. The bodies of all the villagers were pulverized the moment the domain exploded, turning into countless viscous liquids and chunks of flesh. The black tide that seemed to be able to destroy everything spread as much as possible. Some laws of physics seemed to have been quietly modified. The black tide that exploded out was confined to a certain area. The shockwave that spread out from the explosion began to return the moment it reached the edge of the area and continued to hit the center of the darkness. No one could see Li Tianlan in the center of the darkness. No one knew his condition. No one even knew if he was dead or alive. Until a faint blue light flickered in the darkness. The blue electric light disappeared. An extremely powerful beam of sword light shot out. It exploded in the darkness. It was not a thunderous sword energy. Instead, it was an incomparably dazzling ray of pure light. Jiang Shangyu's face changed dramatically in an instant. The moment the blue sword light disappeared, the power of the sword light hidden by the darkness increased rapidly. Thundershocking realm, peak of thundershocking realm, half-step invincible realm. He rushed over all the thresholds. The extremely pure sword light was the real sword energy of the invincible realm. In Jiang Shangyu's knowledge, Li Tianlan's physical strength could not withstand the sword energy. The huge heartbeat beat rapidly in the darkness, resounding through heaven and earth. That seemingly incomparably weak pure light distorted thousands of times in an instant. The shining and brilliant waves of sword light suddenly burst out in the darkness. In a dark domain, the endless light was like a completely burning star, dispelling everything in an instant. Endless light kept flying. Every ray of light was the sword energy of the invincible realm. Without hesitation, Jiang Shangyu turned around and grabbed Jiang Shangyu, who was closest to him. His palm continued to move forward, trying to grab Li Kuangtu on the other side. At the same time, he roared, "Retreat!" Li Kuangtu's arm stretched out. Jiang Shangyu grabbed it. The shining sword light that could pierce through everything appeared beside Jiang Shangyu. The extremely bright sword light twisted again the moment it touched Jiang Shangyu. The sword light in different directions instantly merged into one and burst out directly beside Jiang Shangyu. Humph! Jiang Shangyu suddenly let out a miserable groan with endless pain. Dark red blood with a tinge of black suddenly sprayed out. Jiang Shangyu's arm was completely cut off without any pause under the twisted sword light. That was the arm that grabbed Li Kuangtu's arm. Jiang Shangyu's figure quickly faded in the sword light and disappeared at the same time as Gu Xingyun. Only the arm that grabbed Li Kuangtu and Li Kuangtu remained. Countless sword lights instinctively gathered around Li Kuangtu after losing their target. The dense chill froze Li Kuangtu's body, and the sharp light shot straight. Li Kuangtu looked calm in the face of the sword light that was enough to destroy him dozens of times in a short time. He stubbornly made an enemy of Emperor Dong's palace and had long thought of a similar situation. The sword light was getting closer and closer. The light was reflected in his pupils, extremely cold. Li Kuangtu suddenly smiled. He felt that this was the last expression he left to the world. But in the next second, a bloody arm that even revealed some white bones appeared directly in front of Li Kuangtu, grabbed his neck, and lifted him up. All the sword lights seemed to have found a home and continued to merge with the arm, eventually disappearing without a trace. The arm, which was full of blood and wounds, grabbed Li Kuangtu's neck and trembled slightly because of the sharp pain. The heartbeat sounded again. A large number of wounds on the arm began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. Li Kuangtu opened his eyes. In his line of sight was an extremely pale but still expressionless face, dignified and biting cold. That was Li Tianlan's face. He pinched Li Kuangtu's neck with one hand and looked straight into his eyes. There was still no emotion in his tone, calm and indifferent. "Do you know your mistake?" Chapter 1170. The virtual screen shook violently under the impact of the sword energy and the domain. The apostle closed his eyes as soon as Li Tianlan escaped. He didn't even have time to look at Li Tianlan's injury, but began to sense Li Tianlan's current position without hesitation. The unknown was with Jiang Shangyu. This also meant that Jiang Shangyu was now considered half a shadow creature. Jiang Shangyu in this state was actually very bitter. Because of the influence of the shadow, he was no longer purely real. Of course, even if he was still a real creature, with Li Tianlan's suppression, he couldn't do anything. The most important thing was that Jiang Shangyu couldn't be considered a complete and absolute shadow creature now. No matter what secrets there were, this fact would not be changed. This also meant that he, who wasn't a complete shadow creature, would also be greatly restricted in the real environment. He could survive Li Tianlan's attack and escape from the battlefield. For this, the two princes from the time corridor and the war god's realm had some mental preparation. But Jiang Shangyu couldn't be like Li Tianlan, occasionally ignoring the distance at critical moments and crossing thousands of kilometers in one step. In this battle, he did have the ability to shuttle, because the battlefield was his base. He shuttled to escape from his own base, so the destination of the shuttle would inevitably be his other base. What the apostle had to do now was to lock onto Jiang Shangyu's position, interrupt his progress while he was shuttling, and kill him halfway. Otherwise, once Jiang Shangyu entered his base, they would be afraid to attack again. An expanse of virtual lines immediately connected with the room's virtual screen. With the virtual screen as the center, countless virtual lines frantically spread outwards. The apostle activated his own authority, and in just a few short seconds, a network space that completely overlapped with the real world was established. This was undoubtedly a power that surpassed the real environment. The malice of the world surged. In the apostle's network space, all kinds of equipment he deliberately set up were constantly damaged and constantly replenished. The apostle's face turned from pale to deathly pale, and his body began to quickly become virtual, merging into his network world. In less than half a second of time, the apostle directly produced hundreds of thousands of thought centers in his own network world, all of them within large amounts of thoughts. The centers merged with his own thoughts, and there was no distinction between them. The malice of the world rushed into the network world, countless thought centers instantly destroyed, the apostle's own thoughts fleeing in a sorry state. Under the starry sky, among the authorizations that spanned across the three major factions, only 1.5 authorizations were close to omniscient and omnipotent. Half was an unknown that could not be understood at the moment. Relying on the law of chaos, he was omniscient and omnipotent to a certain extent. The other one refers to Doomsday, who stands at the peak of order, as the destroyer and scientist of the stars. However, the apocalypse relied on its own foundation and the various technological devices it had developed to simulate all kinds of authority, infinitely approaching true omniscience and omnipotence. Even though apostles couldn't do this, if they let go of their misgivings, to a certain extent, they could indeed do many things others couldn't. He was searching for Jiang Shangyu, which obviously would not be interfered with by Feng Qingwu, so he only needed to resist the backfire of the world's malice. Although he could only resist for a short time, a few seconds were enough for him to complete the operation. Xinyuan Wushang didn't pay attention to the apostle. He just looked at Li Tianlan through the shaking virtual screen. He, who didn't know enough about ruthless, felt the weakness of ruthless energy. Obviously, he had some misgivings, so in the real battle, he didn't use ruthless at all. He had been fighting with his bare hands. Jiang Shangyu's last blow was obviously a little unexpected, and Li Tianlan's counterattack was also beyond Jiang Shangyu's expectation. So Jiang Shangyu had an arm cut off. And Li Tianlan himself was also in a mess. But a considerable part of the reason for Li Tianlan's current mess and injury came from himself, not from his opponent. Even if he entered the invincible realm, even if he had a second heart, it was still a bit difficult for Li Tianlan to instantly twist the invincible realm sword energy thousands of times. The second heart could provide unimaginable energy endlessly, which could ensure that Li Tianlan's body wouldn't collapse. But after all, his physical strength was still limited, so the moment he attacked, he was already completely injured. If he didn't have a second heart, this degree of injury was even enough to threaten Li Tianlan's foundation. And now, Li Tianlan's injury still couldn't be healed in a short time. It would take about 7 more heartbeats for his injury to go from serious to light. But while 7 heartbeats provided a lot of vitality, it would also continue to damage Li Tianlan's body. But this injury was nothing at all. This kind of injury was nothing at all. After 7 heartbeats, in about a day, even if he was slightly injured, his combat capability would return to its peak level. Those minor injuries were nothing more than the fact that his physical strength was temporarily unable to control the second heart stably. Xinyuan Wushang was relieved and suddenly smiled. He showed mercy to Li Kuangtu. Even in the last outbreak, those twisted sword lights avoided Li Kuangtu as much as possible. If not, Li Kuangtu would have died several times in this battle. After a pause, Xinyuan Wushang continued, "Big Brother is still too kind." Saint, who was sitting behind, suddenly burst out laughing. She couldn't be considered a stunning beauty. Her appearance was relatively ordinary, but she was full of charm, and her smile was extraordinarily charming. Xinyuan Wushang glanced at her, a little speechless. Saint barely stopped laughing and his face turned red. Li Tianlan was too kind. That was definitely a bad joke. Whether it was Her Majesty Huang Shi at the beginning or His Majesty East Emperor now, they didn't seem to have anything to do with kindness. The former was a tyrant feared by all races in the starry sky, and he had even destroyed a whole star zone with his own hands, not even leaving a speck of dust. Now, Li Tianlan had also slaughtered his enemies. Kindness? What did it have to do with Li Tianlan? Whether it was Her Majesty Huang Shi at the beginning or Li Tianlan now, his gentleness was always to the people around him, and his righteousness always existed in the whole camp. Facing the enemy, every peak existence had the same character, which was absolute brutality. Xinyuan Wushang still wanted to say something. As soon as he opened his mouth, countless virtual lines in the whole room suddenly lit up. In the dense network space, a certain node was completely replaced by a small red dot. Lin Shi, who had been quiet, suddenly stood up. In the process of standing up, his whole body had been completely virtualized and turned into a group of data. Before Lin Shi could stand up straight, his whole body had quickly disappeared from the room. The next second, all the virtual lines disappeared. The apostle's figure reappeared. He sat down on his seat, breathing heavily with large mouthfuls of air. Li Kuangtu, the apostle gasped and whispered, "After all, he is that person's biological father." Chapter 1171. The world was chaotic, and so was distance. A large number of images flashed thousands of times in less than a second. The ocean floating on the top of the mountain ignited in the turbulent waves. The dark sky suddenly became dazzling. The dead corpses gave birth to deformed babies. A large number of figures ran forward and retreated frantically. The strange monsters filled their bodies with heads and arms. The huge tree twisted and grew, and pairs of densely packed eyes grew out of it. The scorching sun slowly went down in the sky. The white clouds floated in front of them. The sky was completely replaced by the earth, with endless depression. The order was completely chaotic, and the rules never existed. The world was upside down at any time. This was the world of the dark shadow. Time, space, rules, everything was not completely opposite, but chaos, endless, without rules and without rules. Gu Xingyun, who was covered in blood, was grabbed by Jiang Shangyu and walked through the chaotic world. Countless scenes surged towards him, and he wasn't even sure if he was in a peculiar space or if he was passing through these scrolls of paintings. He was seriously injured, but compared with Li Kuangtu and Jiang Shangyu, who were not saved, his injury was the lightest. At this time he was very conscious. His clear consciousness was currently undergoing incomparably cruel torture in this strange darkness and chaos. Gu Xingyun felt like a rag doll held in Jiang Shangyu's hand. Obviously, the two of them were running wildly in the darkness at the same time, but in his feeling he seemed to have become Jiang Shangyu's puppet, and his every move was controlled. Countless scenes flashed before his eyes. In Gu Xingyun's sight, there was a bloody castle. In front of the castle was a broken flagpole. The flagpole seemed to be very close to them, only more than 10 meters away, but Gu Xingyun was very sure that Jiang Shangyu took him to run for at least half a minute. But the flagpole was not getting closer, but getting farther and farther away from them. Gu Xingyun finally couldn't help but speak. His voice instantly turned into countless broken and vague syllables in this dark and chaotic world, so that people couldn't hear the specific content at all. Jiang Shangyu took another step forward. Everything around them flew back in an instant. The castle and the flagpole had completely disappeared, and a sea of blood had appeared under their feet. Jiang Shangyu's body relaxed a little, and a relaxed smile appeared on his face. "We're safe," he said slowly. His voice also turned into a large number of broken syllables, but when it fell into Gu Xingyun's ears, the meaning was clear. The blood-colored ocean undulated under his feet. Jiang Shangyu stood on the sea and looked back in the direction where they had escaped. That place was already an empty space. The indifference and gloom in Jiang Shangyu's eyes flashed away. Then he grabbed Gu Xingyun and stepped forward. The boundless sea of blood was instantly split apart. In the next second, all the illusory scenes disappeared. The sound became clearer. The distance became accurate. His cognition returned to normal. All around him was the sound of the waves. In the distance, seagulls flew across the sky. The setting sun slowly sank into the horizon. The incomparably dazzling light shone on the surface of the sea. The waves sparkled, and the entire sea was sparkling. There was soft sand under his feet. In front of him was the coast, and not far behind him was a forest and a mountain range. Gu Xingyun stared blankly at the setting sun that was about to sink into the sea. "Where is this?" It was still morning in Nanyun. Gu Xingyun was very sure that he and Jiang Shangyu had only escaped for a few minutes at most in that strange space. But when they came out of that space, it was already dusk in the outside world. There were only two possibilities. The first was that the flow of time in that escape space was not consistent with that of the outside world. This sounded like a science fiction story. The second possibility was the easiest to explain, which was the time difference. The time difference here was completely different from that in Nanyun. It was still morning in Nanyun, but it was already dusk here. But there was a time difference of nearly 12 hours, which meant that they were extremely far away. Could it be that they had appeared on the other side of the Earth in just a few minutes? This seemed to only mean that the distance in that escape space was different from that of the outside world. This was even more King fantastic. Gu Xingyun shook his head. When he was about to speak, he suddenly heard Jiang Shangyu's slightly confused low roar, "F***CK. What's wrong?" Gu Xingyun was stunned. Jiang Shangyu looked around with a gloomy face. Of course, he knew where he was. To be exact, it was near a naval base in the South American province of Gerda and Chol. It was occupied by the Navy and was not a tourist attraction, so it looked extremely deserted. But the problem was that Jiang Shangyu didn't want to come here. His destination was a cave near the center of the mountain range, far away from the coast in front of him. Going down from that cave, he could reach a secret underground base. That place was also his second base, and also the destination of his escape. However, the current location was at least 200 kilometers away from his destination. The essence of the shadow was chaos. But chaos did not mean that it was inaccurate. It was the first time that Jiang Shangyu had encountered such a situation. "Let's go." Jiang Shangyu took a deep breath, and his voice was low and dignified. He grabbed Gu Xingyun's palm again. He was seriously injured at this time, and he was far away from his base, so he had no ability to travel again. If he wanted to go to the second base, the only choice was to walk. The rules of the shadow were never wrong. The only explanation for such a large distance deviation in the shuttle was that the shuttle was interfered with. This was definitely not good news. Jiang Shangyu pulled Gu Xingyun and turned around directly. Buzz! The whole space suddenly twisted at the moment he turned around. The fierce buzz directly brought up a storm on the beach. The fierce and passionate sword light whistled. Sand and stones flew. In the twisted space vortex, a slender figure who looked very young stepped out. Countless virtual lines were connected to him, densely packed. The space vortex was completely formed. The virtual lines disappeared completely. Virtual shuttle? Jiang Shangyu's pupils suddenly contracted. But the young figure who was shuttling here didn't talk nonsense at all. An extremely heavy and wide giant sword quickly took shape in his hand. As his eyes moved, without any hesitation, the giant sword was raised with violent sword energy, and the sword directly chopped at Jiang Shangyu's head. The sword energy surged. It was like a thunderbolt. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.